At 5:47 that morning, crew scheduling called Captain Flight 447 needs you. The assigned pilot is out. I thought it was just another 12-hour flight to Dubai until I checked the passenger list. The first name made my chest tighten, my wife. Beside her was a man I had never seen in person, both tickets booked under my last name. She had no idea I was flying the plane. Minutes later, I turned on the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." In business class, the champagne went untouched. That was when the perfect lie began to crack. "I'm really glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, drop a quick comment for me. How are you feeling right now in one word? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read." Quick note, certain details have been adjusted for storytelling and reflection. The heart of the story, the message, is what I hope stays with you. The phone rang at 5:47 on a Friday morning in September, and I knew before I answered that something in my life was about to break. The display read, "Crew scheduling." At 62, after 3 decades flying international routes, I recognized the tone of emergency calls. They came when someone's appendix ruptured at midnight, or a heart rhythm went wrong during pre-flight medical. My 4 gold captain stripes meant I was on the short list for immediate replacement. I answered on the second ring. "Captain Bridges, we need you at JFK Terminal 4 by 8:30. Captain Reeves is down with appendicitis. You're taking flight 447 to Dubai." The voice from crew scheduling was brisk, professional, already moving to the next crisis before I'd even responded. I sat at the kitchen counter in our Manhattan penthouse, coffee cooling in front of me, staring at the empty chair where my wife Lorraine usually sat for morning coffee. She'd left the previous evening with a small overnight bag and the words, "Just visiting an old conservatory friend. Back tomorrow." "I'll be there in 90 minutes, I said. The call ended. The apartment settled back into the particular silence of spaces meant for 2 people but currently holding 1. I looked at Lorraine's chair again. 30 years of marriage had taught me the exact angle she tilted her coffee cup, the way she folded the art section of the Times, the small hum she made reading concert reviews. Last night she'd kissed my cheek at the door, mentioned a name I couldn't quite recall her using before, and walked out carrying a bag I didn't recognize. I stood, rinsed my cup, and walked toward the bedroom to dress. Flight 447, JFK to Dubai. 12 hours airborne, 287 souls depending on my hands to stay steady at 39,000 feet. The professional part of my mind was already running pre-flight sequences, weather check, route review, crew manifest. The other part, quieter, kept circling back to one question. "Where exactly did you say you were going?" "Lorraine." I pulled my uniform from the closet, the dark navy fabric still crisp from the dry cleaner. 4 gold stripes on each sleeve. 30 years of long-haul international command. Every storm crossed. Every soul delivered home. I'd flown through engine failures over the North Atlantic, hydraulic malfunctions above the Himalayas, electrical fires that turned cockpits into smoke-filled mathematics problems with 60 seconds to solve. I knew how to read instruments when they lied, how to separate signal from noise, how to bring an aircraft down through zero visibility using nothing but training and will. You need to understand something about pilots. We're trained to separate the signal from the noise, the real warning from the phantom alarm. A caution light doesn't mean panic. It means assess, verify, respond. But that morning, adjusting my tie in the bedroom mirror, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 decades of flying the formless dread that precedes understanding. I walked back through the apartment one final time, checking windows, adjusting the thermostat, performing the small rituals of departure. That's when I saw it. Her overnight bag. The small black roller she'd used for years, monogrammed LMB Lorraine Margaret Bridges, sitting exactly where it always sat in the closet corner. The bag she always took. The bag she'd supposedly taken last night. I stood there, uniform jacket half-buttoned, staring at luggage that shouldn't exist if the story she'd told me was true. She'd carried something out the door. I'd seen the shape of a bag in her hand, but it hadn't been this one. My phone was still on the nightstand. No text. She always texted when she arrived somewhere, a habit born from 30 years of me texting her from cockpits around the world. Landed Singapore. Landed Frankfurt. Landed Sao Paulo. The courtesy of confirmation, the small proof of safe arrival. Nothing. I picked up the phone, opened our message thread. The last text was mine, sent at 11 p.m. Sleep well. Love you. Delivered. Read. Not answered. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was looking for ghosts in empty rooms, that marriage after 30 years meant trusting the pattern even when small details shifted. But pilots don't survive by ignoring shifted details. Pilots survive by asking why the altimeter reads different than it did 5 minutes ago, why the compass heading drifted 2 degrees, why the fuel flow changed when nothing in the throttle position changed. I locked the penthouse door behind me and took the elevator down to the parking garage. The Mercedes started with its usual quiet purr. I guided it up the ramp into pre-dawn Manhattan, the city still caught between night and morning traffic lights, cycling through empty intersections like patient metronomes. JFK perimeter lights glowed ahead, that familiar constellation I'd flown toward 1,000 times. But this morning felt different. This morning, driving past dark storefronts and sleeping neighborhoods, I kept picking at details my mind couldn't smooth over. Which conservatory friend, which old connection from her music teaching days, warranted an overnight visit without me? How many mornings had I driven this exact route? Mind already in the cockpit, already flying. How many times had I missed what was happening in the rooms I left behind? The Van Wyck Expressway stretched ahead, empty at this hour, concrete and painted lines guiding me toward terminals and runways, and the controlled violence of departure. My phone sat in the center console screen, dark. Somewhere in the city behind me, Lorraine was sleeping in a guest room at a friend's apartment. Lying awake in some hotel I'd never seen. The wrongness I couldn't name crawled up my spine like turbulence you feel in your skeleton before the instruments register it. Then the phone screen glowed. Passenger manifest, updated flight, 447, JFK to DXB. I didn't open it immediately. I had 40 minutes before I needed to be at the crew briefing room, and some part of me, the part that had kept 300 souls alive through engine failures and North Atlantic ice, understood that the moment I touched that screen, the life I'd built for 30 years would start its final descent. I opened the notification in the Terminal 4 parking garage. Passenger manifest updated. The file downloaded. I didn't read it yet. Some instinct told me to wait until I was in the cockpit, where 30 years of training could hold me together if the news required holding. JFK Terminal 4. At 7:15 in the morning, smells of stale coffee, jet fuel, and routines so deeply ingrained, they require no thought except, this morning the routine was about to detonate. I entered the crew locker room, adjusting my tie and flat fluorescent light. Gate D12, Boeing 777, Dubai direct, 12 hours airborne. A man in his early 50s appeared in the doorway, dark vest over pressed white shirt. He extended his hand. Captain Bridges, Wade Farrell, senior purser for this rotation. 22 years long haul, so I know how you like the cabin run, quiet, efficient, no drama. Wade had the specific competence of crew who'd spent decades reading passenger needs before they voiced them. His eyes were steady, professional. Clean manifest today, Captain. He continued, placing a printed copy on the table. One minor note, we have a last-minute business class booking a pair. Everything else standard. I nodded. The manifest sat there, innocent paper. Wade stepped out to brief his cabin crew, and I walked toward the gate. Beckett, Sterling 38, sat in the cockpit right seat when I arrived, running pre-flight systems with methodical precision. He'd flown with me twice before, hyper-focused, never asking questions outside operations. Good first officer. Morning, Captain, he said without looking up. Numbers are good. Weather's clear. Dubai's reporting light winds. I settled into the left seat, the position I'd occupied for 3 decades across 7 continents. The yoke felt solid, real, the connection between my hands and 300 tons of machinery. The manifest folder sat on the center console. I opened it. Seat 3, A Bridges, Lorraine M. Seat 3B, Frost Alden. Reservation note, Mr. and Mrs. Bridges. 30 years of marriage. 7,000 nights. 182 countries visited together. All of it compressed into 3 lines of black text on white paper. Beckett continued reading fuel numbers in a steady drone. The universe waits for no man's grief. Outside the windscreen, a baggage cart crossed the tarmac. The world turned indifferent while mine stopped. Mr. and Mrs. Bridges, she was traveling under my name, with another man, to Dubai. On my aircraft, I folded the manifest shut, placed it neatly on the console, looked straight down the center line of the taxiway ahead, focusing on painted yellow lines, because focusing on anything else would require acknowledging what I'd just read. Beckett, continue checklist. My voice sounded exactly as it always did. Calm, measured, professional. 30 years of flying had taught me how to compartmentalize, how to put the engine fire in one box, the dying hydraulics in another. This went in a new box. A box I'd open later. After landing. After 12 hours. After I'd done the only job that mattered, bring everyone home safely. Wade appeared at the cockpit door 30 seconds later. His professional composure remained intact, but his eyes carried an urgent question. Captain, he said quietly, a word. I stepped into the galley area just beyond the cockpit door. Wade dropped his voice to barely above a whisper. Sir, I need to confirm something. The woman in 3AL. I saw the manifest. She's already ordered champagne. They both have. The reservation shows them as a couple. I wanted you to know before we push back. There are moments on the flight deck where the universe narrows to two distinct tracks, the job you are bound to perform and the collapse you refuse to permit. I stood at that intersection, staring at a man who'd just handed me confirmation that my 30-year marriage had boarded my aircraft with another man's hand on her waist. Document the manifest exactly as issued. I said, my voice flat as an operations checklist. Photograph the reservation entry. Preserve the champagne receipt. If she asks for me, the captain is unavailable during flight operations. Understood. Wade's eyes held steady. He understood. Not the full story, he couldn't possibly, but he understood that whatever was unfolding in Seat 3A required precision documentation and absolute professional protocol. Understood, Captain. He disappeared back into the cabin. I returned to the left seat. Beckett was reviewing approach charts for Dubai, oblivious. The door between cockpit and cabin, reinforced steel bulletproof, locked from the inside, would stay closed for the next 12 hours. No passenger could enter. No one could reach me, including her. I keyed the PA system. The microphone clicked live. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 447 to Dubai. We're expecting smooth conditions today and an on-time arrival. Sit back, relax, and we'll have you on the ground in approximately 12 hours. Thank you for flying with us. The same warm, measured, professional tone I'd used for 30 years. Perfectly unchanged. The armored cockpit door clicked shut between me and the business class cabin, where 7 rows back someone heard that voice and understood for the first time the magnitude of the mistake just made. The PA system went silent. Through 7 rows of steel glass and locked protocol, I couldn't see her face, but I didn't need to. 30 years of marriage teaches you exactly what certain silences mean. Beside her in 3B, Alden Frost 47 had settled into business class, with the easy confidence of a man who believed he'd already won a game whose rules he didn't yet understand had changed. He was beginning to comprehend that first class doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it just means there's nowhere left to run. At 8,000 feet, the engines settled into their cruise rhythm, a sound I'd trusted for 30 years, the only sound in my life that had never once lied to me. The aircraft pushed through scattered clouds, climbing steadily toward our assigned altitude of 39,000 feet. New York fell away below Manhattan's grid, shrinking to toy dimensions, the Hudson River. A silver thread, the Atlantic stretching ahead like an answer I wasn't ready to hear. Beckett worked through the after-takeoff checklist with mechanical precision, calling out items I confirmed without thinking. Gear up. Flaps retracted. Climb power set. The cockpit settled into the particular quiet of a flight deck in controlled ascent, where everything functions exactly as designed, and the only variable is the humans inside. The interphone chimed. Wade's voice came through the small speaker mounted beside my left ear, professional, but carrying an edge. I recognized the tone of someone who'd found something they wished they hadn't. Captain, the champagne service in business class. I need to confirm a detail. I pressed the talk button. Go ahead. The charge was processed using an airline employee credit card, ending in 7731. That's flagged in our system as crew-issued corporate. 7731. I knew that number the way I knew my aircraft type, rating, my employee ID, my home address. I'd memorized it the day I handed the card to Lorraine, exactly 1 year ago, standing in our kitchen, after a particularly brutal 3-week rotation through Asia that had left me exhausted and guilty for missing her birthday. I gave her that card a year ago, I said, quietly, aware that Beckett was 3 feet away, pretending not to listen. For emergencies. Medical crisis, urgent travel, true emergency only. Wade's silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds too long. Understood, Captain. The charge was for 2 bottles of Dom Perignon, $197. I looked out the windscreen at clean sky at the horizon line, where blue met blue at the world, that continued turning, regardless of whether marriages held together or fell apart at altitude. She'd used my emergency lifeline, the card I'd given her, with explicit instructions that it represented absolute trust, the safety net, for when something went catastrophically wrong, to buy champagne for the man in seat 3B. The man whose name wasn't mine, but who was traveling under my identity. The man whose hand was probably resting on her knee right now, while they clinked crystal glasses and congratulated themselves on whatever they thought they were accomplishing. Thank you, Wade. Anything else? Yes, sir. One more item. He paused. She's carrying a small, dark blue leather notebook. It was visible when she opened her purse. I recognize airline crew personal items. We all carry notebooks, logbooks, things like that. But this one looked significant. Dark blue leather. I closed my eyes for exactly half a second, then opened them and returned my gaze to the instruments. Because looking at altitude indicators and fuel flow was safer than looking at the memory now assembling itself with brutal clarity. 5 years ago, our 25th wedding anniversary. I'd been in Singapore when the date arrived, unable to be home, hating myself for it. I'd found a leather goods shop in Orchard Road and spent 2 hours selecting the exact shade of blue she loved. Midnight blue, she called it, the color of concert hall curtains. I'd had it shipped to New York with a card tucked inside the front cover, my handwriting careful and deliberate. Write down every city I fly to, so I am never truly far from you. 25 years. Here's to 25 more. 25 years ago, I wrote those words in fresh ink, believing I was building a bridge across distance. I didn't know I was handing her the blueprint for dismantling everything we'd built. Wade, I said, voice steady as a runway heading. Did you see what was written inside? Briefly, Captain. When she left it open on the tray table, the last page had handwritten text. Numbers. Looked like international bank routing codes. And a name, Emirates NBD. Dubai. The aircraft climbed through 12,000 feet. The engines didn't care about international wire transfers or offshore accounts, or the fact that the romantic gift I'd inscribed with promises was now carrying operational details for financial fraud. The aircraft cared about thrust, drag, lift, and weight. 4 forces in perfect balance. Everything else was just human failure. I'd given her 2 things out of love. The emergency card, absolute trust in case she ever needed rescue. The anniversary journal, a token meant to keep me symbolically close during long flights to fill the distance with shared geography. She'd converted both into instruments of theft. The card wasn't for emergencies. It was for funding. Whatever this was, the trips, the hotels, the champagne that tasted like 30 years of marriage dissolving in crystal flutes. The journal wasn't recording cities I'd flown to. It was recording the coordinates for cash transfer, the final operational details needed to move money I'd earned crossing oceans into accounts I'd never see. You need to understand something about long-haul pilots. We're trained to compartmentalize. Fire in the cargo hold. Compartmentalize. Engine failure over the Atlantic. Compartmentalize. Wife planning financial fraud 7 rows behind you. Compartmentalize. I compartmentalized. Wade, I need you to document everything. Photograph the reservation. Note the time of the champagne order. If you see that notebook again, I need you to record exactly what's visible. Don't engage. Don't let her know you're observing. Understood. Understood, Captain. The line went quiet. I returned my hands to the yoke, feeling the slight vibration that meant the aircraft was doing exactly what it was built to do, carrying weight forward through thin air toward a destination it would reach, whether or not the people inside wanted to arrive. I closed my eyes for exactly 1 second, processing the weaponized tokens. Then I opened them and returned to the instruments. The interphone chimed again. Wade's voice came through one more time, quieter now, the tone a man uses when he knows the next sentence will draw blood. Captain, there's one more thing. About when you gave her that card. I lifted the receiver. The airline charity gala last September. You were there with Lorraine, handed her the card that night at the table. I remember because 3 days later she came back to another event and introduced me to someone. A man. Said he was a financial consultant helping with estate planning. Wade paused. His name was Alden Frost. 3 days after I'd handed her the emergency card, she'd introduced Wade to the man who would help her dismantle our marriage. The timeline wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. But I need to take you back 4 months before that flight. Because without those 4 months, this morning would look like an injury instead of what it actually was, a verdict. May 2024. Late night in our Manhattan penthouse study, the silence that only comes after midnight, when the city finally exhales. I sat before the laptop reviewing 3 consecutive months of joint bank statements. $47,000. 6 weeks of withdrawals. Cash. ATM transactions categorized as household expenses scattered across dates I couldn't match to any memory of Lorraine mentioning repairs, purchases, emergencies. I called the one person whose judgment I trusted more than my own. My daughter Sienna answered on the second ring, her voice carrying none of the sleepy confusion a midnight call should produce. 34 and sharp as Manhattan steel, she'd been the first to notice the unusual withdrawals 4 months earlier, though I didn't know that yet. Dad. One word. The way she said it told me she'd been expecting this call. $47,000, I said. 6 weeks. Household expenses. I need you to tell me I'm seeing ghosts. The silence lasted 5 seconds too long. Dad, I need to tell you something. I've known for 2 months. I just didn't know how to tell you. That was the moment I forced myself to face it. The rift wasn't merely emotional. It was financial. And my daughter had been carrying that knowledge alone, trying to protect me from a truth she knew would break something I'd spent 3 decades building. What exactly have you known for 2 months? I've been watching the accounts for 8 weeks, Dad. The withdrawals started in March. Always cash. Always under 10,000 to avoid bank reporting thresholds. Always when you were on long-haul rotations. I kept hoping I was wrong. Hearing my daughter speak with such clinical calm anchored me, yet deepened the quiet dread. She'd been documenting evidence while I'd been crossing the Atlantic oblivious. There's more, she continued. His name is Alden Frost, financial advisor supposedly. At least that's what Mom said. But the way she said it made me start looking at the numbers differently. Alden Frost. The name Wade would speak to me 4 months later. I already started pulling his records, Dad. You need to see what I found. Call me back after you look. You need to understand something about pilots. We're trained to respect patterns. 1 warning light can be faulty. 3 warning lights means someone needs to look deeper. $47,000 in unexplained withdrawals, a daughter investigating for 2 months, and a name I'd never heard weren't 3 separate problems. They were 3 instruments reading the same malfunction. I typed Alden Frost, financial advisor, New York. The first link, Delaware Superior Court, 2019. Civil fraud lawsuit. Misrepresentation, asset concealment, breach of fiduciary duty, settlement sealed. The second, a polished LinkedIn profile listing corporate positions at firms I recognized, but couldn't verify when I clicked through. Impressive credentials that dissolved under scrutiny. The third, a consumer protection forum where people go when the legal system has failed them. I scrolled through posts dated across 3 years, each describing an identical pattern. Romance. Trust established. Offshore accounts. Ghost companies. Disappearance. The fourth result made me stop breathing. FBI Financial Crimes Division. Active monitoring file since 2022. Interstate wire fraud investigation. No charges filed yet, but the file was public enough to serve as warning. I'd married Lorraine 30 years ago, believing I knew how to read people. But I'd never run her name through a search engine alongside someone else's. Never had reason to. Later that night, early that morning, I sat before the screen and did what any well-trained pilot does before steering into severe weather. I gathered enough data to map the storm. Every article, every court filing I could access, every forum post from victims describing how they'd been approached, courted, convinced to move assets into structures they didn't understand. The pattern was consistent as a script. This was no longer a private marital affair. This was a federal fraud conspiracy with my retirement accounts as the target. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out the card I'd kept for months, perhaps knowing on some primal level this runway was inevitable. Celeste Townsend. 50 years old, the kind of attorney powerful people call before admitting they're in trouble, and exactly the kind who knows the difference between a divorce and a federal fraud case. I called her office voicemail at 3 in the morning. Celeste, it's Harlan Bridges. I need an immediate consultation regarding financial irregularities and potential fraud. This is urgent. She called back at 7:30, voice already sharp with clarity. This isn't matrimonial law, Harlan, she said after I'd laid out the evidence. This is criminal financial conspiracy. If we're doing this, we're building a federal case. That takes time, precision, and documentation that will hold up under scrutiny. Are you prepared for that? How long? 4 months, minimum. We need to let them think they're succeeding while we document every move. 4 months. That's how long I'd known. That's how long I'd been preparing. I returned to the present moment in the cockpit, the Atlantic stretching endless and blue beneath us. 4 months of preparation had led to this exact configuration, my wife and her co-conspirator trapped at 35,000 feet, with nowhere to run while I held every operational control, including the one piece of evidence Celeste said we needed most, the thing Wade was about to hand me next. As the aircraft cleared Newfoundland, a secure operational frequency that most passengers never know exists began to chime in my headset, and I picked up the receiver, knowing that whatever came next would be measured in evidence, not apologies. The JFK corporate security manager's voice came through the encrypted channel with the careful, professional tone of someone delivering information they know will detonate a life. Captain Bridges, this is Harvey Brennan, JFK Corporate Security. I need to confirm your physical location at 07:43 hours this morning. The precision of that question told me everything. Security managers don't ask about your location unless someone claims you were somewhere you weren't, or someone was somewhere using credentials that belong to you. I was confirmed inside the crew briefing room at Terminal 4 at 07:43, I said. Pre-flight brief for Flight 447. Why? A pause. The kind that lasts 2 seconds but feels like descending through severe turbulence with no visibility and failing instruments. Captain Employee ID card ending in 7731 triggered a security flag this morning. Unauthorized wire transfer. Initiated from the Terminal 4 Premium Crew Lounge banking kiosk. $85,000. Transaction timestamp 07:43 hours. $85,000. I looked at the altimeter. 39,000 feet. The aircraft flew itself with mechanical indifference to the fact that my wife had just stolen more money than most families earn in 2 years. I was in the crew briefing room, I repeated, voice flat as a runway in Kansas. That card was issued to my wife for domestic emergencies. She kept it. Understood, Captain. Then someone used your physical card and your 6-digit master PIN at that terminal. The withdrawal processed successfully. 17 minutes before your scheduled pushback. 17 minutes. I did the math with the cold precision of fuel calculations. Pushback at 0800. Transfer at 0743. That gave her exactly 17 minutes to execute an $85,000 wire walk from the crew lounge banking kiosk through Terminal 4 to Gate D12. Board my aircraft, settle into business class seat 3A, and order champagne. 17 minutes to strip a man clean and smile at him through 7 rows of pressurized aluminum. The PIN, I said quietly. How did she have the PIN? Sir, the card requires a 6-digit master PIN for withdrawals over $10,000. That's crew-specific security protocol. Only the cardholder and authorized designee should possess that information. I closed my eyes for exactly 2 seconds, then opened them and returned my gaze to the horizon line, where sky met ocean in a mathematically perfect division between up and down, right and wrong, before and after. She had the PIN because I'd given her the card to keep. For emergencies, medical crisis, urgent travel, the kind of trust you extend to someone after 30 years of marriage When you believe stupidly, it turns out that the word emergency means the same thing to both of you. $85,000. Transferred at 0743. I pushed back from the gate at 0800. Do the math. 17 minutes. That's how long it took her to move every dollar and walk to my airplane, with a man whose hand was probably on her waist while I was reviewing weather patterns and fuel loads. Captain Bridges, I need to ask directly, did you authorize this withdrawal? No. Did you provide your PIN to the individual who made the withdrawal? I provided the card and PIN to my wife for emergency use. Domestic emergencies, medical situations. I did not authorize an $85,000 cash withdrawal 17 minutes before an international flight. Another pause. I could hear Harvey typing, documenting every word I spoke, building the official record that would transform this from a private marital collapse into corporate theft and federal wire fraud. Understood, Captain. We're logging this as unauthorized use of crew credentials. The transaction is flagged. I'll need a formal statement upon your return, but for now, do you want us to alert the passenger? No. The word came out harder than I intended. Beckett glanced at me briefly, then returned his attention to the navigation display, pretending he hadn't heard. Do not alert the passenger, I continued, voice dropping back to operational monotone. Log the transaction with exact timestamp and ATM location. Preserve all digital footage. I will provide a sworn corporate statement immediately upon landing in Dubai. But do not, under any circumstances, alert the passenger that this has been flagged. You need to understand what that timestamp means in criminal law. It's not just evidence of theft. It's proof of premeditation, coordination, intent to flee jurisdiction. It transforms everything. A spouse taking money from a joint account is a civil matter. A spouse using stolen credentials to wire funds 17 minutes before boarding an international flight with a man under fraudulent reservation is federal criminal conspiracy. Copy that, Captain. Transaction logged as unauthorized. Evidence preserved. We'll await your statement. The line went dead. I replaced the headset and looked at the fuel flow indicators. The engine parameters, the navigation display showing our route across the Atlantic toward a continent where Lorraine believed she'd complete whatever plan she'd been executing for the past year. She thought she was flying toward an offshore account and a new life. She didn't know she was flying toward a prison sentence. This wasn't impulse. This was systematic asset extraction on a timeline. The emergency card I'd given her a year ago. The master PIN I'd provided for her safety. The anniversary journal I'd inscribed with romantic promises. The 47,000 in earlier withdrawals Sienna had documented. And now this morning, the final extraction. $85,000 stripped from the crew lounge. ATM while I sat 300 yards away, reviewing checklists, trusting that the woman I'd married 3 decades ago still understood the difference between emergency and theft. Celeste had told me 4 months ago we need time-stamped evidence of financial extraction with clear criminal intent. We need documentation that will survive federal scrutiny. I had it now. 0743 hours. Terminal 4 Gate D12 Crew Lounge. $85,000. Unauthorized use of crew credentials. 17 minutes before international departure. Geolocated. Time-stamped. Unalterable. I looked down at my hands on the controls. They were completely steady. Good, I thought. Neither will the verdict. Outside the windshield, the North Atlantic stretched below vast flat and as unyielding as a choice already made. Lorraine had crossed a line this morning that no apology, no explanation, no amount of time could ever pull her back across. 3,000 miles behind me, Sienna was doing exactly what I'd raised her to do, documenting, preserving, coordinating with Celeste to transform chaos into courtroom evidence. But I need to be honest about something. There were pieces of this story unfolding in the cabin that I only came to understand later when Ramona Hewitt sat across from me in a Dubai operations office and unspooled the details she had recorded over those 12 hours. When I recount this part of the story, I must be clear I didn't know any of this at the time. I was locked in the cockpit, flying the aircraft, watching instruments and managing fuel. But 7 rows behind me, something extraordinary was happening. Ramona Hewitt. 53, high-net-worth divorce and asset protection attorney based in New York, had boarded Flight 447 early with legal briefs for a Dubai client meeting. She'd settled into business class seat 4. C opened her leather attaché case and begun reviewing dissolution documents for a case involving offshore trust structures and suspected shell company fraud. According to what she told me later, she'd glanced up as business class continued boarding, the way you do when you're waiting for the cabin to settle, half watching the flow of passengers, finding overhead bins, and adjusting seats. The man in 3B turned his head to speak to someone boarding behind him, and Ramona Hewitt recognized him instantly, Alden Frost, her ex-husband. The man who'd stripped her of $340,000 in their 2019 divorce before vanishing into the financial fraud networks she'd spent the next 5 years trying to map for clients who'd fallen victim to the same playbook. I looked up from my briefcase, she told me later, voice steady as a deposition transcript, and saw the man who destroyed my financial life sitting 3 feet ahead of me. She didn't gasp, didn't flinch, didn't make a sound. She was a lawyer who'd spent 2 decades handling cases where men lied about money and women learned too late what trust actually cost. She'd learned to recognize opportunity when the universe placed it directly in her assigned seat. 5 years, she said. I'd spent 5 years wondering where he'd gone after the settlement. And here he was smiling at another woman the exact way he'd smiled at me in 2016 when he was emptying our joint accounts into Cayman structures I couldn't touch. The woman in 3A was Lorraine, my wife, though Ramona didn't know that yet. She only knew what she could observe. Alden Frost was traveling with a woman they'd ordered champagne, and the reservation card she could see the flight attendant checking listed them as a couple. I didn't panic, Ramona recounted. I didn't confront him. I opened my phone. She activated the standard voice recording app every smartphone carries, placed the device in her jacket breast pocket, with the microphone oriented toward row 3. And then she sat back and waited for Alden to speak himself into federal custody the way she knew he would, because men like Alden Frost can't help explaining their own brilliance even when they should stay silent. As a divorce attorney specializing in high-net-worth fraud, Ramona knew New York's one-party consent law cold. She was an occupant of a shared acoustic environment. Her phone was her personal property in her own pocket. No hidden surveillance equipment. No secret recording devices. She was simply documenting a conversation she could hear with her own ears from her assigned seat in a commercial aircraft cabin. You need to understand what one-party consent means in this context. Ramona wasn't planting bugs or using hidden surveillance. She was sitting in her assigned seat with her own phone in her own pocket, recording a conversation she could hear naturally. Perfectly, completely, undeniably legal. The kind of evidence that survives every courtroom challenge, because it was obtained without deception, coercion, or technical manipulation. I'd watched him destroy 3 women before me in divorce court, she told me. Saw the pattern, saw the playbook. Romance trust offshore coordination disappearance. This time he was going to record his own conviction. For the first 90 minutes of the flight, Ramona recounted the conversation in row 3 was carefully vague. Romantic pleasantries, travel excitement, champagne refills. The kind of talk that sounds innocent if you don't know what you're listening for. But Ramona knew what she was listening for. She'd spent 5 years deposing victims, reviewing financial records, mapping the linguistic patterns fraud artists use when they think they're safe. She knew that eventually Alden would shift from performance to operations, from romance to extraction, from pretending to planning. 3 hours into the flight it happened. Alden leaned closer to Lorraine and dropped his voice. Not whispering that would draw attention from nearby passengers. Just lowering his volume to the register people use when discussing details they don't want overheard by strangers. Ramona's microphone, positioned 6 inches from his shoulder, through the thin fabric of airline seat upholstery, captured the frequency clearly. The post-landing coordination sequence needs to execute within 48 hours of wheels down. Ramona would tell me later, when I heard that phrase coordination sequence, I knew he was running the exact same operation. Same vocabulary, same cadence, same predatory playbook. Not plan, not arrangement. Coordination sequence. Like military ops. That's the exact language he used on me in 2019 when he was explaining why I needed to sign documents I didn't understand. She didn't move, didn't react. Just sat in 4C with her legal briefs open on her tray table, appearing to any casual observer like a professional reviewing contracts, while her phone recorded the man who destroyed her financial life, explaining to another woman how he planned to execute the same systematic theft. I couldn't hear Lorraine's response over the engine hum, Ramona told me. But my phone caught his words perfectly. Every syllable, every pause, every operational detail. She recognized the pattern immediately. This wasn't romantic getaway. This was financial extraction protocol. The kind of language you use when you've done this before. When you have a system, when you're following a playbook refined across multiple victims. According to Ramona, Alden shifted even closer to Lorraine after that phrase and began outlining something she couldn't quite catch over the ambient noise, but she saw Lorraine's expression change. Saw her lean back slightly. Saw the first micro-gesture of hesitation, the physical tell that appears when someone hears something that doesn't match the story they've been telling themselves. Whatever Alden said next, Ramona's phone captured it in full digital clarity. I would hear those words myself soon enough. Whatever Alden said to Lorraine in that moment, the words Ramona's phone captured in full digital clarity, I would hear soon enough. But first I had to deal with what was happening in real time 7 rows behind me. The aircraft continued its steady march at 35,000 feet, and at the corner of my secondary flight display, small green characters began to populate the screen, one text at a time. Confessions typed into an empty space the sender assumed was private. The auxiliary communications screen blinked incoming transmission via in-flight Wi-Fi. Origin seat 3A. I glanced at the display. The message appeared in clean digital text against the dark background of the flight management system. I know you saw the manifest. Please let me explain. She knew. Lorraine knew I'd seen it. Knew I was sitting 7 rows ahead of her, flying the aircraft she'd boarded under fraudulent reservation, reading her desperation in digital characters, transmitted through satellite systems that time-stamped and logged every byte of data. I read the message once. Then I archived it without responding. The cursor blinked in the empty reply field, a silence that said more than any words I could type. Beckett was reviewing fuel consumption data, oblivious to the text appearing on my secondary screen. Good. This wasn't his operational concern. This was mine. 5 minutes later, another message populated the display. I made a mistake. 3 words. 14 characters including spaces. Admitted culpability, transmitted via commercial airline Wi-Fi network, logged with timestamp device identifier and origination seat number. I archived it. 3 minutes after that, a third transmission arrived. Please, I made a mistake. The desperation was escalating. Each message shorter, more urgent, the digital equivalent of someone knocking harder on a door they know won't open. I archived it. 4 minutes later, the screen blinked again. Longer message this time. Alden told me this trip would fix everything. He said you were already planning to leave me. He showed me consultation notes from his attorney. I believed him. There it was. The narrative Alden had fed her. The false story, designed to justify taking my emergency card, withdrawing $85,000, boarding my aircraft under fraudulent identity, traveling to Dubai with a man who specialized in offshore asset extraction. She was typing Alden's defense strategy into permanent digital record, corroborating the conspiracy in her own words, providing written evidence that she'd acted on information she now claimed came from him. You need to understand something about digital evidence in modern divorce law. Every text message carries metadata. Timestamp, origin seat, device ID, Wi-Fi routing log. She wasn't just confessing. She was notarizing her confession with airline systems documentation that would survive any courtroom challenge. I archived the message and entered a notation in my flight log. 1,047 hours, subject transmitted electronic communications via Seat 3A in-flight Wi-Fi system. Messages archived per operational protocol. Permanent, official, documented. The messages continued arriving every 5 to 10 minutes, desperation building with each transmission. Each one I read once, archived without reply, and logged in my operational records. Please answer me. I know you're angry. I just need 5 minutes to explain. Every unreturned message added another layer to the legal framework Celeste was building. Evidence requires very little hunting when the target hands it to you across a digital network wrapped in metadata, time-stamped by satellite systems preserved in airline communications logs. She was building the case against herself, one panicked text at a time. At 11:30, 15 minutes after the last message, a longer transmission appeared. The fourth message held one specific name, a sentence I read carefully because its full legal weight would make sense only once Celeste cross-referenced it against the asset transfer timeline. Alden said his attorney, Gregory Mason, verified you'd already filed for divorce. Mason and Associates in Manhattan. He showed me the consultation notes. That's why I thought this was already over between us. Please believe me. Gregory Mason of Mason and Associates Manhattan. The attorney Alden claimed had verified a divorce filing that never existed. A legal professional whose name appearing in Lorraine's desperate text message just became evidence of potential conspiracy to dissipate marital assets. She was trying to prove she'd acted on legitimate legal advice. Instead, she just exposed that the conspiracy extended beyond her and Alden, that a licensed attorney may have provided professional cover for asset extraction based on fabricated divorce documentation. The conspiracy was expanding, and every participant was being documented in real time through messages sent from Seat 3A at 35,000 feet over the North Atlantic. I saved the complete message thread, including all metadata timestamps, device identifiers, seat origin markers, Wi-Fi routing logs. Then I composed a single transmission to Celeste via encrypted satellite link. Subject confirms knowledge of travel arrangement. Multiple electronic admissions archived with full metadata. Legal name attached Gregory Mason and Associates Manhattan. Verify against consultation records and asset transfer timeline. Full package follows upon landing. I transmitted the message and returned my attention to the flight instruments. Fuel flow normal. Engine parameters within limits. Navigation on course. Everything functioning exactly as designed, while the evidence accumulated in digital storage systems that would outlive any marriage, any betrayal, any attempt to claim ignorance or accident. 30 seconds later, my encrypted communications panel lit with Celeste's reply. Just 2 words, but they told me the conspiracy had just exposed a weakness we could exploit. Got him! I looked at those 2 words for exactly 3 seconds. Then I archived the message, cleared my screen, and returned my full attention to flying the aircraft. The North Atlantic stretched below us, flat and indifferent. Somewhere over that ocean, the boundary between international and domestic airspace existed as invisible coordinates that determined which courts had jurisdiction, which laws applied, which evidence could be used, and how. We were still in international airspace, still beyond the immediate reach of U.S. federal authority. But in 6 hours, we'd cross back into jurisdiction where everything Lorraine had typed, everything Alden had said, everything Ramona had recorded would transform from private disaster into prosecutable federal conspiracy. The next move belonged to Sienna 3,000 miles away in Manhattan, and my daughter was executing it perfectly. Sienna was executing it perfectly, though I wouldn't know the precise details until much later, when she sat across from me and recounted every choice she'd made that morning, with the clinical precision of someone who'd learned to separate law from love. While I was maintaining heading over the open Atlantic, my daughter was sitting in her Upper West Side apartment, with her laptop and phone performing an investigation no father ever wants his child to handle, yet one no father could witness without profound pride. At 11:03, Sienna's phone lit with an incoming text. The sender was listed simply as Mom. You need to text your father for me. He won't answer his system. Sienna told me later that she stared at that message for exactly 10 seconds. Not because she didn't understand it, because she understood it perfectly. Lorraine was trying to route around my silence through our daughter, desperate for any communication channel that might reach me through the locked cockpit door and the deliberate void where my responses should have been. Sienna had a choice in that moment. Be the daughter who protects her mother, or be the attorney who protects her father. I looked at that message for 10 seconds. She told me later, voice steady as courtroom testimony. Attorney 1, daughter lost. She typed a reply with deliberate legal intent, each word chosen not for comfort, but for extraction. Mom, just tell me what happened. Did you use Dad's card? Simple question. Direct. The kind that invites confession while appearing to offer understanding. The kind lawyers use when they need someone to admit culpability in their own words, without realizing they're building the prosecutor's case. Sienna waited. 3 minutes passed. Then Lorraine's response appeared on screen, desperation overriding caution. It's just a temporary loan, Sienna. Once your father signs his retirement buyout papers, the asset division will smooth everything over. Alden explained the whole process. Your father will understand once we land. Sienna read that message twice. Then she captured a screenshot, preserving the exact text timestamp and metadata. 3 distinct criminal elements compressed into a single desperate paragraph. First, written admission of unauthorized card use, temporary loan, was legal code for theft when the cardholder never authorized the transaction. Second, acknowledgement of retirement fund coordination. She expected me to sign buyout papers. I'd never seen documents that would transfer assets I'd never agreed to move. Third, expectation of asset division based on fabricated legal framework. Smooth everything over implied she believed a settlement existed when no such agreement had been negotiated, discussed, or filed. Sienna told me later, when Mom asked me to contact you, I had a choice. Be the daughter who protects her mother, or be the attorney who protects her father. I chose you. I'll live with that choice for the rest of my life. She routed the screenshot directly to Celeste's secure server encrypted transmission, time-stamped upload, preserved in digital formats that would survive any courtroom challenge. Then she composed a brief message to me via satellite link. Dad, got it. Sending to Celeste now. I received that transmission at 11:08 while reviewing fuel consumption data over the mid-Atlantic. I read Sienna's note once, archived it, and returned my attention to flying the aircraft. My daughter was doing exactly what I'd raised her to do, thinking 3 moves ahead, documenting everything, letting the target build the case against themselves through their own desperation. But Sienna wasn't finished. She sent 3 screenshots to my satellite terminal in rapid succession. The first showed Lorraine's initial plea, "You need to text your father for me." The second captured Sienna's strategic question, "Did you use Dad's card?" The third preserved Lorraine's confession about the temporary loan and retirement buyout. Then a fourth transmission arrived, different from the others, flagged with a brief note in Sienna's precise legal handwriting. "Dad," she wrote more, "but I think you should read the final transmission yourself later. Not now." I saw the notification appear on my auxiliary screen during a routine navigation check. The file sat there unopened, flagged with my daughter's careful warning. I deliberately didn't open it. You need to understand what Sienna did in that moment. She didn't just forward evidence. She became an active participant in her mother's prosecution. That's not something a 34-year-old does lightly, even when the law demands it. Even when the father she's protecting spent her childhood in cockpits around the world, trusting her mother to raise her while he crossed oceans for a living. She chose me anyway. Chose the evidence. Chose the law over the woman who'd taught her to read, driven her to piano lessons, sat in the audience at every recital while I was landing in Tokyo or Dubai or Sao Paulo. The weight of that choice wasn't something I could process at 35,000 feet, with 6 hours of flight time remaining, and 287 souls depending on my ability to compartmentalize personal catastrophe. So I left the fourth screenshot unopened, flagged, saved, waiting. Certain pieces of information require the right atmospheric pressure to be understood. Some truths need to be absorbed on the ground, where you can sit down if they knock you over, where you can process them without worrying about maintaining heading and altitude and fuel management. Dubai was still 9 hours away. The fourth screenshot would wait. I archived Sienna's transmission, cleared my screen, and returned to the instruments. Outside the windshield, the Atlantic stretched endless and indifferent, the same ocean I'd crossed 1,000 times before. Except this time I was carrying evidence instead of just passengers, building a federal case instead of just logging flight hours. The fourth screenshot sat unopened in my satellite inbox, flagged with Sienna's careful warning. I would read it eventually, before Dubai, before landing, before the moment when every piece of evidence would need to align perfectly. But not yet. Some truths are best absorbed at altitude, where there's nowhere to run from them and no choice but to keep flying forward. The interphone chimed. Wade's voice came through professional, but carrying the edge of someone who'd just witnessed something he knew I needed to hear about immediately. "Captain, I need to brief you on an observation from the cabin." I picked up the interphone receiver, expecting Wade to brief me on something visible, immediate happening in the cabin right now. Instead, what he told me would only make complete sense hours later when multiple pieces of evidence converged into a single prosecutable pattern. But I need to be clear about something. There are elements of this sequence that occurred in total shadow to me at the time, elements that only materialized when Ramona Hewitt placed a small black recording device in my palm hours later in Dubai and said, "Listen to this from the beginning." What I'm about to tell you happened at 11:30 that morning, 3 hours into the flight in business class. Row 3. I didn't hear it when it occurred. I heard it on digital playback wearing headphones in a crew operations office while Ramona sat across from me and watched my face process what her pocket microphone had captured with perfect clarity. On the recording, Alden Frost's voice drops to the register menus when discussing details they don't want strangers to overhear. Not whispering that draws attention. Just lowering the volume to conversational intimacy. The kind of tone that sounds like trust, but functions as camouflage. Within 48 hours of wheels down, you initiate the wire. 1.2 million. Emirates NBD, the account number I gave you. $1.2 million. The approximate value of our joint marital retirement fund money I'd accumulated over 30 years of international flight salary and pension contributions, the financial foundation I'd built to fund the life after flying. He was instructing my wife to wire our entire retirement savings into a Dubai bank account within 2 days of landing. Directly behind them, in seat 4C, Ramona's phone sat in her jacket breast pocket, microphone positioned 6 inches from Alden's shoulder, through the thin fabric of airline upholstery, capturing every syllable with the clarity of courtroom-quality audio evidence. Alden continued, voice still low but perfectly audible on the recording. "This is your money too, Lorraine. Half of it is legally yours." That phrase, "half of it is legally yours," would become Exhibit D in the federal complaint Celeste filed 6 weeks later. Because it's legally false. Joint marital assets in New York require dual consent for transfer. One spouse can't unilaterally move retirement funds without the other's signature authorization and legal acknowledgement. What Alden called your money was actually our money, protected by matrimonial law, specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of covert extraction. He was coaching her to believe she had unilateral rights to assets requiring dual consent. Framing theft as empowerment. Making conspiracy sound like independence. "I'm just helping you get it first," Alden said on the recording. "Before the lawyers freeze everything. You need to understand what conspiracy to dissipate marital assets means. In criminal law, it's not just one spouse moving money. It's coordinated, coached, systematic extraction designed to prevent equitable division. And Ramona's recording captured the entire coaching session when complete with timeline, dollar amount, bank name, and the legally false assertion that Lorraine had independent authority to transfer funds she demonstrably did not control alone. On the recording, I could hear the ambient engine hum, the distant sound of a flight attendant's voice 3 rows forward, the specific acoustic signature of a Boeing 777 cruising at altitude. And underneath it all, Alden Frost explaining to my wife how to strip me of 30 years of retirement savings, using language designed to make her believe she was protecting herself rather than committing federal wire fraud. "Your name is on the account," he said. "You have every right. Don't let him control what's already yours." Ramona told me later that when she heard those words, "Don't let him control what's already yours," she gripped her armrest so hard her knuckles went white. Because those were the exact words Alden had used on her in 2019. Word for word. Like reading from a script he'd memorized and deployed across multiple victims with the precision of someone who'd refined the playbook through repetition. Listening to the recording hours later, I heard what Ramona had recognized immediately identical operational pattern. Same vocabulary. Same psychological manipulation. Same timeline pressure. 48 hours creates urgency, prevents reflection, forces action before rational analysis can interfere. Ramona had heard this exact script 5 years ago when Alden convinced her to transfer $340,000 of her own divorce settlement into an offshore account for protection. The money vanished within 72 hours. Alden disappeared 6 days later. The account turned out to be registered to a Cayman shell company that dissolved before her attorneys could file recovery motions. This wasn't romance. This was systematized financial predation, with a recycled playbook deployed against women he identified as vulnerable, isolated, and convinced their marriages were already over. Later, when I asked Ramona how she sat there listening to him run the same operation on another woman, she said, "Because this time I had the record button. This time he was going to convict himself." On the recording, Alden added one more detail, voice confident, as someone explaining something he believed was already decided. Once the transfer completes, we're protected. The account is structured so New York courts can't touch it. Dubai doesn't have reciprocal enforcement agreements for U.S. domestic financial disputes. We're safe, legally sophisticated, operationally precise. Exactly the kind of statement that proves criminal intent rather than accidental misunderstanding. Ramona told me, when I heard 48 hours, I knew. That's his operational window. Not 40, not 72. Always 48. He used that exact timeline on me. It's long enough to seem reasonable, but short enough to prevent the target from seeking independent legal advice. The recording continued for another 30 seconds. I could hear Lorraine's breathing, the slight rustle of fabric, as she shifted in her seat. Then she asked Alden a single quiet question over the engine hum. I won't tell you what she asked, not yet. Because that question, and the way Alden answered it, would become the exact moment Celeste said transformed this from financial fraud into something the FBI had been waiting 5 years to prosecute. But I needed to hear it in sequence with all the other pieces in place. First, I needed to understand what Ramona was about to hand me next. That recording would deliver the full sequence, the question, the answer, the moment that connected everything into federal prosecution. But first, I needed to understand what was happening in real time while I was still flying. 10 minutes later, the woman from Seat 4C stood at the entrance of my command deck with a small white envelope and an opening sentence I will carry with me for the rest of my days. Wade had arranged for her to speak briefly in the forward galley, just beyond the reinforced cockpit door. Beckett was monitoring systems, fuel flow, normal navigation on course. Everything under control except the life disintegrating 7 rows behind me. Ramona Hewitt stepped into the forward galley area professional and calm, despite what I would soon understand she'd been enduring for the past 4 hours. Captain Bridges. My name is Ramona Hewitt. I'm a divorce and asset protection attorney out of New York. And the man sitting in 3B Alden Frost used to be my husband. I looked at her. Decades of managing flight decks have trained me to absorb shocking information without visible reaction. Engine fire at rotation. Manage it. Hydraulic failure over the Atlantic, compartmentalize. The woman in business class is your wife's co-conspirator's ex-wife, and she's been recording everything. I managed it. How long were you married? 3 years. He took $340,000 in our divorce settlement before vanishing into offshore networks. I spent the next 5 years trying to map. I've been sitting in 4C for 4 hours documenting every word he said to your wife, because someone should have given me the same choice 5 years ago. She set a white envelope on the center console between the throttle quadrant and the navigation display. Everything's in there. Audio file. Legal quality. New York is one-party consent. I'm a participant in the shared acoustic space. This will survive any courtroom challenge. I picked up the envelope. Inside a small USB drive and a handwritten note with timestamp seat numbers and the phrase, Dubai Coordination Sequence Verbal Confirmation of Wire Transfer Intent. Why are you doing this? Ramona's eyes held steady. Professional, certain. Because he's running the exact same operation on her that he ran on me. Same timeline, same phrases, same manipulation. And this time I have the record button. She stepped back into the cabin. Wade brought the envelope directly to me through the cockpit door. I held it for 30 seconds, staring at it, like it was a piece of equipment that might detonate if handled incorrectly. Then I opened my personal laptop, the one I used for flight planning and logbook management, inserted the drive, and loaded the audio file. I adjusted the foam pads of my headset, pressed play, and heard my wife's voice for the first time since dawn, not across a kitchen counter, not through a text screen, but captured on the phone of the woman sitting directly behind her, planning my financial execution. The quality was remarkably clear. Engine hum in the background. Ambient cabin noise. But Lorraine's voice came through unmistakable, speaking at conversational volume to the man in 3B. The moment we return from this trip, I'll force him to sign the retirement buyout. I'll claim half the marital assets and join you in Dubai permanently. He won't realize what happened until the accounts are cleared. I pulled the headset off for 1 second. Took a breath that filled my lungs with recycled cockpit air that smelled like electronics and cold metal. Put the headset back on. There was more. Alden's voice smooth and confident. And you're certain you can get him to sign the buyout paperwork Gregory drafted is solid, but it requires his signature. Gregory Mason. The attorney Lorraine had named in her desperate text messages to me. Now confirmed on audio as the legal professional who'd drafted documents designed to strip me of retirement assets under false pretenses. Lorraine's response came after a brief pause. He trusts me. He'll sign anything I put in front of him if I tell him it's routine financial planning. 30 years of marriage means 30 years of signatures he never questioned. 30 years of trust, weaponized into operational advantage. The recording continued. I heard the clink of glassware champagne refills. Heard Alden's voice drop lower, more intimate. And the Connecticut property, 3 seconds of ambient cabin noise. The kind of pause that happens when someone considers a question whose answer will define everything that follows. Then Lorraine's voice, quiet but perfectly captured by Ramona's microphone 6 inches away through seat fabric. That too. 2 words. You need to understand what those 2 words meant. That too. Not just the money. Not just the retirement fund I'd accumulated over 30 years of international flights. But the house. The land. The quiet Connecticut mornings. The place where I'd imagined spending my final years watching frost melt off hills and reading flight logs in a study overlooking maple trees I'd planted with my own hands. She wanted everything, not half everything. This wasn't marital dispute. This was engineered financial obliteration coordinated between my wife, a serial fraud artist, and a legal professional who drafted paperwork designed to look legitimate while functioning as theft. I sat there with the headset in my hand. The recording paused, staring at the fuel flow indicators because looking at anything else would require processing emotions I couldn't afford to feel, while responsible for 287 lives at 35,000 feet. The conspiracy had been legally advised, systematically planned. 30 years of devotion entirely recontextualized as operational vulnerability exploited by people who'd studied my patterns long enough to know exactly which signatures I'd provide without scrutiny. I checked the chronometer. Dubai was 9 hours away. 9 hours until wheels touched ground, and every participant in this conspiracy would be within reach of law enforcement Celeste had been coordinating with for 4 months. But 9 hours was also enough time if I initiated the countermove now. I picked up the satellite phone and dialed Celeste Townsend's direct line. She answered on the first ring, voice sharp with the awareness that captains don't make satellite calls mid-flight unless the situation demands immediate legal intervention. Celeste, I have audio confirmation, wire transfer intent, Dubai coordination, Connecticut property specifically named, and the attorney who drafted the buyout paperwork. I'm sending you the file now. I heard her keyboard already clicking before I finished the sentence. Uploading emergency TRO petition as we speak. How long until you land? 9 hours. That's enough. I'll have every joint account frozen before you touch down. Celeste moved faster than I'd ever seen an attorney move in my life. And I'd seen a lot of attorneys over 30 years of contract negotiations, union disputes, and corporate legal frameworks. I initiated the satellite link to Celeste Townsend at exactly 1:30 p.m. New York time midnight, according to my internal body clock, though neither of us gave a single thought to the hour. She picked up on the first ring. No greeting, no pleasantries. Just the voice of someone who'd been waiting for this call and had already started drafting documents before the phone rang. Tell me what you have. I laid it out in 4 minutes, voice flat, as a pre-flight briefing. Manifest booking showing Mr. and Mrs. Bridges for seats occupied by my wife and another man. $85,000 wire transfer 17 minutes before pushback using my crew card and master PIN. Text message confessions to Sienna, admitting unauthorized use and referencing retirement buyout coordination. 2-hour audio recording from passenger in 4C capturing detailed wire transfer instructions and Connecticut property discussion. Celeste cut in before I finished the last item. This is no longer matrimonial dispute, Harlan. This is criminal financial conspiracy requiring federal-level emergency response. I heard her keyboard clicking in the background. She was already typing. I'm drafting emergency asset preservation order immediately. We will have ex parte TRO active on every joint marital account within 3 to 4 hours. Connecticut house frozen. Brokerage accounts frozen. His shell entities flagged directly with FINRA and SEC. 3 to 4 hours. That meant the legal perimeter would close while I was still over the Atlantic. Before Lorraine knew what was happening. Before Alden realized the trap had already sprung. FBI, I asked, already on my list. Financial Crimes Division has had Alden Frost on active monitoring since 2022. This audio recording provides the actionable trigger they need to elevate from surveillance to intervention. I'll coordinate directly with their Dubai legal attaché. By the time your wheels touch Dubai tarmac, Lorraine won't have legal authority to move a single dollar. Neither will he. You need to understand what an ex parte, temporary restraining order means. In high-asset divorce, it's a judge signing an emergency freeze based on one party's evidence alone without the other side present to argue or defend. And with time-stamped ATM theft, plus audio-recorded conspiracy, to transfer retirement funds, Celeste had exactly the ammunition required to convince a judge that immediate action was necessary to prevent irreparable financial harm. How confident are you on the timeline? I asked. Judge Morrison is on duty today. She handled the Caldwell case last year. Similar fact pattern: spouse attempting offshore transfer during active dissolution. She signed that TRO in 90 minutes. I'm filing electronically within the hour. Figure 2 hours for judicial review, 1 hour for processing and service initiation. 3 to 4 hours total. I checked the chronometer. 1:30 p.m. New York time. If Celeste filed by 2:30 and Judge Morrison signed by 4:30, the freeze would be active before sunset. 7 hours before I landed in Dubai. Connecticut property, separate filing. Real estate-specific injunction preventing any transfer, encumbrance, or modification of title. That one simpler, takes maybe 90 minutes. The house will be frozen before you're halfway across the Atlantic. I looked out the windscreen at endless blue. Somewhere below us, the ocean moved in patterns that hadn't changed in 10 million years. Up here, everything was changing in hours. What do you need from me? Nothing until you land. Keep that audio file secure. Forward any additional text messages Lorraine sends. Otherwise, fly the aircraft. I'll handle the legal machinery. The line went quiet for 3 seconds. Then Celeste's voice came back, softer, but no less precise. Harlan, I'm sorry this is happening. But you did everything right. The evidence is clean. The timeline is documented. This case will hold. I ended the call and sat there with the satellite phone in my hand, staring at instruments that measured altitude, airspeed, fuel flow. Objective truths that didn't care about marriages or betrayals or legal machinery grinding into motion 3,000 miles away. 2 hours later, at 3:30 p.m. New York time, Wade's voice came through the interphone. Professional but carrying information he knew I needed to process. Captain, cabin observation you should be aware of. Go ahead. Passenger in 3A woke from sleep approximately 20 minutes ago. Physical distance from passenger in 3B, now explicit, she's maintaining clear separation. Received text message read. It darkened screen immediately and concealed phone from his view. Wade's voice carried the specific tone a professional uses when observing human behavior, shift in real time, not judgment. Not pity, just the practiced recognition of someone who'd spent 2 decades watching people reveal themselves at altitude where there's nowhere left to hide. Your assessment. She's decoupling from him, Captain. 22 years flying long haul, you learn to read the shifts. Body language doesn't lie at 35,000 feet. I filed that information in the same mental compartment where I'd been storing everything else, evidence to be processed later after landing, after the immediate operational demands released their grip. Understood. Anything else? Wade paused. Brief hesitation that told me he was weighing whether to share something now or wait. One more detail, Captain. Small thing, but I think it'll matter when we're on ground. I'll brief you properly after we secure the aircraft. I didn't ask what it was. Wade had been reading passengers and crew dynamics longer than some pilots had been flying. If he thought the detail needed context I didn't yet have, I trusted his judgment. Copy that. Thank you, Wade. The interphone clicked off. I sat there looking at the navigation display, at the line showing our progress across the Atlantic, at the estimated time of arrival that marked the moment when everything would shift from evidence collection to legal execution. Wade mentioned one final observation before clearing the line, a small detail about what Lorraine had done that would return to me much later after the wheels were secured and the legal machinery had finished its work. At that moment, I simply nodded and kept my eyes on the horizon. Some details require the full picture before their weight becomes clear. Sienna was capturing something crucial in Manhattan, and it arrived 3 sequential screenshots at a time, each one another nail in a case that was already airtight, before my daughter added her methodical prosecution. The small satellite communication monitor on the left console illuminated at 3:45 p.m. 3 sequential screen captures from Sienna, followed by a single line. Dad got the third one. I opened the first screenshot, while Beckett ran fuel calculations, oblivious to the legal machinery grinding into motion through satellite links and encrypted channels. Lorraine's text to Sienna, time-stamped 40 minutes earlier, appeared in clean digital characters against the blue background of a standard messaging app. I only told him that when your father signs his exit packages, we will have total fluidity with the capital. I haven't done anything illegal, Sienna. That phrase, I haven't done anything illegal, was the tell. The denial before accusation. The defensive statement that appears when someone knows exactly what they're doing and needs to convince themselves otherwise before anyone else asks the question. Legally, it's called consciousness of guilt. When you proclaim innocence before being charged, you're admitting you understand the action could be interpreted as criminal. It transforms everything that follows, from innocent explanation into knowing admission. I saved the screenshot with formal timestamp notation. Subject confirms coordination of capital access contingent on retirement fund transfer. Denial of illegality indicates awareness of criminal exposure. The second screenshot showed Sienna's strategic follow-up, playing the role of confused daughter while functioning as skilled prosecutor. Mom, what about the $85,000 from the banking kiosk transfer Dad's card? Direct, simple, impossible to deflect without either lying or admitting. The third screenshot contained Lorraine's response, arriving 2 minutes after Sienna's question, long enough to consider her words, short enough to show she wasn't consulting anyone else. That was simply a bridge loan, Sienna. Temporary liquidity until the asset division processes. Your father will be compensated fairly through the settlement. You need to understand what bridge loan means in criminal asset dissipation cases. It's the classic defense. I was going to pay it back. It was temporary. I had every intention to replace it. The law doesn't care about intention when you take joint funds without authorization. It only cares about the taking. And Lorraine had just provided written confirmation of exactly that unauthorized taking, with expectation of later settlement rather than prior consent. I forwarded all 3 screenshots to Celeste via encrypted satellite transmission with a 2-word subject line, written admissions. Her response arrived 90 seconds later, voice-to-text transmission that appeared as clean text on my auxiliary display. 3 distinct criminal elements documented: asset coordination, unauthorized withdrawal, expectation of division without consent. This is sufficient for formal criminal referral to FBI Financial Crimes Division. Forwarding package immediately. 3 written confessions, each one building on the last. Capital fluidity coordination. $85,000 bridge loan. Asset division expectation. Lorraine had typed herself into federal custody using her daughter's phone as the collection instrument. I archived the screenshots in 3 separate folders, one for Celeste, one for my own records, one flagged for FBI handoff. Then I returned my attention to the flight instruments, because fuel flow and navigation don't pause for marital dissolution, even when that dissolution is being documented in real time across satellite links at 35,000 feet. Beckett called out a minor heading adjustment. I confirmed. The aircraft continued its steady march toward Dubai, indifferent to the evidence accumulating in its communication systems. Then a 4th transmission arrived from Sienna. Different formatting, longer message preview visible before I opened the file, but Sienna's accompanying note was explicit and unusual in a way that made me pause. Dad, she wrote more, but I think you should read the final transmission yourself later, not now. Sienna explicitly flagged a final message that she insisted I hold for later. My daughter, who had just extracted 3 written criminal admissions from her own mother with surgical precision, thought whatever that last screenshot contained required me to wait. Required preparation. Required the right moment. I didn't force the file open. Certain pieces of information require the right atmospheric pressure to be understood, and 6 hours from Dubai flying at 35,000 feet, with 287 souls, depending on my ability to compartmentalize personal catastrophe, wasn't the moment. The notification sat there flagged, waiting. A small icon indicating unread content carrying whatever final confession or justification or plea Lorraine had typed to our daughter, while sitting 7 rows behind me in business class, physically separating from the man who'd coached her into federal conspiracy. I would read it. Before Dubai. Before landing. Before the moment when legal machinery and evidence and coordination would need to function with absolute precision. But not yet. Some truths require processing at the right altitude. Some information needs to be absorbed when you're prepared for its weight. And Sienna, who knew me better than almost anyone, who understood the difference between information that strengthens resolve and information that fractures it, had made the call that this particular message needed to wait. I trusted her judgment. I checked the navigation display. 6 hours to Dubai. 6 hours of steady flight fuel management communication protocols and the operational discipline that had kept me alive through 3 decades of international aviation. I would read it before Dubai. But not yet. First, I needed to map out the operational variables the only way I knew how, through a standard emergency checklist. 6 steps, clear sequence. The kind of framework that turns chaos into procedure, emotion into action, catastrophe into something you can manage one item at a time. I pulled a blank page from my flight bag and began writing. I sealed the cockpit door from the inside. The lock mechanism clicked with a finality that felt like closing a vault. In the silence that followed, I became acutely aware of how isolated this space was, how removed from the passenger cabin, from Lorraine's empire of lies, from the cargo hold that now held evidence I couldn't yet name. The soundproofing was so complete that I could hear my own breathing, the faint electronic hum of the flight management system, the whisper of pressurized air through the vents. I needed to think like a pilot again. Strip away emotion. Focus on systems. Treat this like any other emergency, identify the threat, assess the risk, execute the appropriate checklist. Except there was no checklist for this. I pulled out my notepad and began writing not a flight checklist, but a sequence for what came next. Document, preserve, coordinate, land. Every emergency had a procedure. This one was no different. I wrote 6 items. By the 5th, my hand had stopped shaking. I stared at the 6th blank line. What came next? The weight of that unanswered question pressed down on me like atmospheric pressure at 39,000 feet. The altitude alert chimed. We were approaching our initial cruise level. Meridian 447, climb and maintain flight level 370. The controller said, his voice cutting through my thoughts. Climb and maintain 370 Meridian 447. Beckett responded smoothly, his hands already adjusting the altitude selector. I watched the altimeter wind upward, the digital numbers rolling past. Outside, the sky had darkened to that deep twilight blue that comes just before true night. Below us, the Atlantic stretched endless and black. The memory hit me without warning. Lorraine in the delivery room 19 years ago. Not the sanitized version I'd replayed 1,000 times, but the raw truth of it. She'd gripped my hand so hard I thought bones would break, her face twisted with effort and pain, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. The overhead lights had been brutally bright, clinical, and I'd thought in that moment, this is what strength looks like. But I'd misidentified the strength. What I'd witnessed wasn't the courage to bring life into the world, or not only that. It was the determination to anchor me, to create a chain I couldn't break. She'd been losing me even then, felt me pulling away toward a career that would take me into skies she couldn't control, into cockpits where she had no access, no influence. The baby Sienna had been her countermove, and it had worked. For 19 years, it had worked perfectly. I'd stayed. I'd compromised. I'd chosen routes that brought me home more often, turned down international positions that would have meant longer absences. I'd structured my entire career around being present for a daughter who now barely spoke to me, and a wife who'd used that daughter as leverage. The ACARS message printer chattered, snapping me back to the present. A routine position report, nothing more. But it reminded me of something crucial, something I'd almost lost in the emotional turbulence of the past hour. I was still a pilot. Still the pilot in command of this aircraft. Everything else, Lorraine's schemes, the cargo, my crumbling marriage, even my daughter's college fund, all of it was secondary to one fundamental truth. Primary objective: complete this flight safely. 287 people were breathing recycled air 39,000 feet above the Atlantic, trusting that I would get them to Dubai. They didn't know about the $85,000. They didn't know about the suspicions gnawing at my gut. They didn't know about the marriage disintegrating in real time, or the cargo that might be evidence of something criminal. They knew only that a captain sat in this seat, and that captain's job was to fly the aircraft. So that's what I would do. I would fly the aircraft. I would monitor the systems. I would maintain the pretense of normalcy with my crew. And I would make no decisions, not about Lorraine, not about the cargo, not about anything beyond aviation, until this aircraft was safely on the ground at Heathrow. Then and only then would I deal with the rest. "Harlan," Beckett said, breaking the silence. "You seem pretty focused over there." I glanced at him. In the instrument lights, his expression was neutral, professional. Did he suspect something was wrong? Could he sense the tension radiating from my side of the cockpit? "Just making some notes," I said, keeping my voice level. "Standard procedures." He nodded and returned his attention to the navigation display, apparently satisfied. I looked back at my notepad at that blank sixth line on my emergency checklist. I knew what to write there now. Not a procedure or a step, but a commitment. "Remember, you are the pilot. Fly the aircraft. Everything else waits." I capped my pen and tucked the notepad into my flight bag. The cockpit settled into the rhythm of cruise flight. The steady hum of engines. The whisper of air over the fuselage, the occasional radio call. Peaceful. Almost hypnotic. The kind of environment that could lull you into complacency if you let it. But I couldn't let myself relax. Not yet. Not while questions remained unanswered. I had 5 hours until landing. 5 hours to maintain this facade. 5 hours to keep flying while the truth, whatever it was, waited in the cargo hold below. Wade's voice came through the interphone at hour 7, with a question I wasn't prepared to answer. "Captain, what do you want me to tell the passenger in 1A who says he lost $40,000 to the man in 3B? "Tell him to write down everything he remembers," I said. "Date, amount, location, method. We'll coordinate with authorities on the ground in Dubai." "Copy that, Captain." The lock on the cockpit door clicked open. Wade entered, settling into the right seat with the practiced economy of movement that comes from 15,000 flight hours. He'd taken his scheduled rest period in the crew bunk, leaving me alone with my thoughts for 90 minutes. "Anything unusual during my break?" he asked, adjusting his headset. "Define unusual." He glanced at me, registered the tone, nodded once. "Copy that, Captain." I briefed him tersely. "Passenger situation developing in business class. May require ground coordination, Dubai." He didn't ask for details. The professional restraint between pilots knowing when to press, when to wait, created a shared understanding that needed no elaboration. 20 minutes later, the interphone chime broke the cockpit's mechanical rhythm. "Cockpit," I answered. Ramona's voice carried the controlled urgency of a flight attendant who'd seen enough irregular situations to know when something mattered. "Captain Passenger Clarence Harding in seat 1A has information regarding another passenger. Nature of the concern. He's writing it down, sir. Says he recognizes 3B from a prior incident." My hand tightened on the handset. "I'll take the written statement." "Understood, Captain." Wade watched me hang up. "Third-party observation. Appears so." 5 minutes later, Ramona delivered a printed screenshot to the cockpit, a typed note from Clarence Harding's phone, formal enough to suggest the man had written legal documents before. Wade scanned it first, his expression hardening, then passed it to me. The text was precise. Subject in seat 3B matches. Individual who defrauded me of $40,000 via fabricated real estate development fund, Atlanta, Georgia, October 2020. Subject used name, Alan Forrester, at that time. Scheme involved non-existent commercial property portfolio. I am willing to provide formal statement to authorities upon landing. Clarence Harding, age 62, retired insurance adjuster, currently residing Tampa, Florida. I read it twice. The professional language, the specificity, the dollar amount. "That makes 3 confirmed victims on this aircraft," I said quietly. Wade exhaled slowly. "Likely more, Captain." The math was inescapable. Patricia Weston's trust fund, $57,000. Lorraine's joint account transfer, $85,000. Now Clarence Harding, $40,000. 3 people, 3 cities, 3 separate schemes. The probability that only 3 victims out of 367 passengers had encountered Alden Frost approached 0. How many others were sitting in that cabin right now, unaware they'd shared oxygen with the man who'd destroyed their finances? Dubai approach briefing, Beckett said, pulling up the airport chart on his display. Runway 30 LRNAV approach, current weather. He walked through the descent checklist with methodical precision: fuel calculations, weather review, alternate airport confirmation. The standard procedures created a temporary bulkhead between emotion and duty. I compartmentalized, forcing my mind into the narrow channel of flight operations. Altitude, heading, speed. The 3 coordinates that mattered at 39,000 feet. But even as I reviewed the approach plate, the implications of Clarence's statement cascaded through my thoughts. Lorraine wasn't the first. She was the pattern. Alden Frost or Alan Forrester, or whatever other names he'd used, had operated across state lines, across years, across victim profiles. Retired insurance adjusters, stay-at-home mothers, probably young professionals, elderly widows, anyone with accessible assets and trust to exploit. Not an opportunist who'd stumbled into one successful fraud. A systematic predator who'd refined his approach through repetition. The cold clarity of it settled in my chest like ice. Lorraine had been targeted the same way Clarence had been targeted. Identified, cultivated, deceived. The only variable was the story Alden told real estate funds for Clarence import business for Lorraine. "Captain," Wade said, breaking my analysis. "Ramona mentioned the woman in 3A seemed upset earlier." I kept my voice level. "What time?" "Around 16:30 Zulu, hour 6. He paused. She wasn't speaking to her companion, just staring at the tray table while he slept. 4:30 Eastern Time, right after I'd left the cabin. Something had shifted in that window, some interaction I hadn't witnessed. "Noted," I said. The AQR's printer chattered, spitting out a weather update. Wade tore off the paper, scanned it. Dubai sandstorm warning. Visibility reduced to 4,000 meters within landing minimums. Adjust the approach brief accordingly. Copy. He marked the update on his chart, recalculating the decision altitude. Technical focus. The weather didn't care about fraud schemes or broken marriages. It simply was, and we would either meet its requirements or divert to our alternate. What Lorraine told me 3 hours after we landed in Dubai, in the crew operations lounge, after Alden had been escorted away by Interpol officers, explained the moment Wade had observed. "He slid the paper across the tray table," she said, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "Power of attorney document. My name, the joint account signature block at the bottom. Said it was for tax efficiency on the import business." I'd listened without interrupting. I was reading the corporate registration section. Only his name listed. Not joint ownership. She'd looked at me, then eyes red-rimmed. I asked why. "What did he say?" "Cleaner legally. You trust me, right?" That question, the one con artists always ask when the mark starts questioning. The appeal to the relationship they've manufactured. I put the pen down, Lorraine said. That's when I knew. Sitting in the cockpit at hour 8, I didn't yet have that conversation. But I understood something fundamental had changed in seat 3A at 16:30 Zulu. Lorraine had chosen differently when it mattered. Not in time to prevent the deception that had already happened. Not in time to avoid boarding this flight under another woman's name. But in time to prevent completion. In time to refuse the signature that would have transferred the remaining assets irrevocably. "She didn't sign," I said aloud, too quiet for Wade to hear over the engine noise. When it counted, she didn't sign. Beckett keyed the microphone. "Muscat Control Meridian 447 requesting descent clearance. Meridian 447 cleared to descend flight level 280. I watched the autopilot begin the descent, the nose pitching down fractionally, the altimeter starting its slow unwind. 39,000 feet to sea level. 8 hours of Atlantic crossing compressed into the final 40 minutes of approach. 3 victims on one aircraft meant dozens more existed in cities I'd never see. Clarence Harding had lost 40,000 in Atlanta. Somewhere else, someone had lost their retirement in Phoenix. Someone else their inheritance in Seattle. The pattern extended backward through years forward through victims I couldn't count. Lorraine hadn't signed, but she'd believed long enough to board a flight under another woman's name. The question descending through diminishing altitude wasn't whether Alden Frost belonged in custody. It was how many others were still holding pens over documents they hadn't yet refused. At 39,000 feet above the Arabian Gulf, I reached for the public address microphone and prepared to announce our descent into the country where my marriage would legally end before my flight logbook closed. The answer to how many others still held pens over unsigned documents would have to wait. First, I had to land this aircraft. I keyed the PA at 5:50 a.m. Dubai time, 2 hours before touchdown. My voice carried the same professional neutrality I'd used 12 hours earlier, nothing suggesting the passenger in 3A was my wife, or that the man beside her would be in federal custody before breakfast. Ladies and gentlemen from the flight deck, we've initiated our descent into Dubai International. We'll be arriving shortly after local sunrise. Current weather is clear temperature 28 degrees Celsius. Thank you for flying with us. I hung up the handset, including the two of you in 3A and 3B, I added quietly. Wade pulled up the descent checklist. Altimeters, set and cross-checked. Approach brief, complete. Landing data, calculated and verified. Descent checklist complete. The eastern horizon bled faint orange through the windscreen. We descended through layers of air that grew progressively warmer, the outside temperature gauge climbing as altitude decreased. Beckett keyed the radio. Dubai approach Meridian 447 flight level 310 descending. Meridian 447 Dubai approach. Good morning. Descend and maintain flight level 240. Expect vectors for ILS runway 30 left. Flight level 240, Meridian 447. I adjusted the altitude selector, felt the autopilot respond. They're ready for us on the ground, I said. Wade nodded. He'd filed the advance coordination paperwork 3 hours ago. Passenger of interest federal processing required discreet handling requested. 2 minutes later, the controller's voice returned with the instruction I'd been waiting for. Meridian 447, advise upon landing. You will hold short taxiway echo for customs coordination. Beckett's eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. Copy, hold short echo for customs coordination, Meridian 447. Customs coordination. The phrase air traffic control used when law enforcement needed access before regular deplaning. CBP officers would be staged at taxiway echo with vehicles, credentials, and probably restraints. They were waiting for him. Alden Frost would step off this aircraft into federal custody within minutes of wheels touching pavement. No chance to blend into the terminal crowd. No opportunity to slip away while Lorraine handled baggage claim. I felt something cold and precise settle in my chest. Not satisfaction. More like the click of a lock mechanism engaging. The interphone chimed. Cockpit, I answered. Captain cabin secure for landing. Ramona's voice crisp and professional. All passengers seated, tray tables stowed. Thank you. I returned my attention to the descent profile. 17,000 feet now, the city lights of Dubai visible ahead, a vast sprawl of illumination against black desert, the Burj Khalifa's needle piercing the pre-dawn darkness. The sun broke the eastern horizon at 6:50 a.m. local time. Orange light spilled across sand, bleeding into pink and gold. The Gulf stretched dark to our right. Ahead, Dubai's towers caught the first rays, glass and steel igniting. 32 years ago, I'd married her at sunrise. I permitted myself one final memory, not of the woman in seat 3A, but of the woman I'd proposed to on the Brooklyn Bridge in May 1992. Music teacher at Lincoln Center, 26 years old, eyes dark and alive with something I'd mistaken for permanence. She'd had a laugh that erased rooms, hands that moved when she talked. I'd asked her to marry me as dawn broke over the East River. You're serious, she'd said, half laughing. Right now, sunrise seemed appropriate for a music teacher. She'd said yes before the sun cleared the buildings. Did that woman still exist, 6 rows behind me? Or had she died somewhere I wasn't looking, replaced incrementally by someone capable of boarding a flight under a false name? That woman died somewhere I wasn't looking, I said aloud, too quiet for Wade to hear. Then I shelved the memory and returned to the work. Gear down, Beckett called at 7:05 a.m. I reached for the landing gear lever, pulled it down. The airframe shuddered as 3 sets of wheels extended into the slipstream. 3 green lights illuminated nose gear, left main, right main. Gear down 3 green, flaps 30. Flaps 30 set, landing checklist complete. The physical jolt of gear extension severed the last thread of memory. I was present now, hands on the controls, despite the autopilot's availability. I needed to feel the aircraft, the weight of it, the response, the precise moment when wheels would meet concrete. Runway 30. L stretched ahead 2 miles distant. Airspeed 140 knots. Sink rate 700 feet per minute. Perfectly stabilized. 500 feet, Beckett called. The runway threshold lights brightened as we descended. 100. I disconnected the autopilot, took manual control. My hands absorbed the subtle feedback through the yoke. 50, 40, 30, 20. I eased back on the yoke, flaring the nose up fractionally. The sink rate decreased. The mains hovered inches above pavement. Wheels touched Dubai runway 30L at 7:23 a.m. local time. Thrust reversers, Beckett said. Reversers deployed. The engines screamed, massive doors redirecting thrust forward, decelerating 287 souls I'd carried across the Atlantic and half the Middle East, including a wife who'd finally refused a signature and a fraudster who'd counted on her compliance. I'd delivered them both. First job complete. The spoilers deployed automatically, disrupting lift, settling the aircraft's full weight onto the landing gear. Through the windscreen, I could already see them, 4 unmarked sedans and a van staging at Taxiway Echo, 600 feet ahead, vehicles that didn't belong to airport operations. Beckett keyed ground control. Dubai ground Meridian 447, runway 30 left taxi instructions. Meridian 447. Dubai ground taxi via Alpha, hold, short, Taxiway Echo. Taxi Alpha, hold, short, Echo, Meridian 447. I let the aircraft decelerate to taxi speed, turned onto the parallel taxiway, and began the slow roll toward the point where everything else would begin. The flight was over. 90 seconds, until I stopped short of the normal gate and watched federal officers board through the forward door. I stood in the cockpit doorway and watched 4 Dubai police economic crime officers board through the forward door, while 286 passengers behind them believed they were about to deplane normally. The 90 seconds had elapsed. We'd arrived. The aircraft sat secured at Gate D7, engines spooled down to silenced jetway, extended and mated to the forward door. Wade completed the shutdown checklist with mechanical precision, hydraulics off, fuel pumps off, electrical systems transferred to ground power. Shutdown checklist complete, he said. Hold the door, I replied. Already coordinated with Ramona. The forward cabin door remained closed, despite passenger expectation, despite the jetway connection, despite every normal cue that deplaning should begin. Through the windscreen, I could see ground crew positioning equipment, baggage handlers waiting. Everything appeared routine, except for the 4 unmarked sedans and vans staged 30 meters from the gate. The forward door opened. 4 men entered, plainclothes, credentials clipped to belts, moving with the controlled precision of law enforcement officers who'd executed this choreography before. Dubai Police Economic Crime Division. Behind them came a 5th man, American, early 40s, wearing a charcoal suit despite the desert heat outside. Ramona directed them to the staging position near the forward galley, out of passenger sight lines. The lead officer nodded to her, then turned toward the cockpit. Captain Bridges. The American extended his hand. Marcus Reeve, FBI legal attaché stationed in Dubai. We're positioned. I shook his hand. Subject is seated 3B, unaware. On your signal. I glanced past him into the cabin. Business class passengers sat restless, checking watches, reaching for bags in overhead bins. Alden Frost sat relaxed in 3B, scrolling his phone. Lorraine beside him in 3A stared at the seatback, face unreadable. I nodded to Reeve. Execute. He stepped back into the galley. Wade emerged from the cockpit, buttoning his uniform jacket, and moved down the aisle with the practiced ease of a pilot who'd made this walk 10,000 times. I watched from the doorway. Wade stopped at row 3, smiled professionally at Alden. Sir, need you to step forward to clear a baggage document. Alden looked up from his phone, expression mildly puzzled, but unconcerned. Baggage document. Routine customs matter. Just need your signature up front. Of course. Alden stood smoothly, slipped his phone into his pocket. He touched Lorraine's shoulder. Be right back, sweetheart. Lorraine didn't respond, didn't look at him, just kept staring at the seatback. Alden stepped into the aisle, followed Wade forward past row 2, past row 1, past the galley, where Ramona stood with a coffee pot as camouflage. He stepped through the forward door onto the jetway and stopped dead. 4 officers blocked the exit, forming a wall between Alden and the terminal. Marcus Reeves stepped forward holding a warrant folder. Alden Frost, you are being held at the formal request of United States federal authorities under mutual legal assistance protocols between the UAE and the United States. Federal wire fraud, money laundering, interstate financial crimes, spanning 2018 through 2024. Alden's face went white. This is a mistake. I have rights. You have right to legal counsel under mutual legal assistance protocols, one of the Dubai officers said, producing steel handcuffs. Place hands behind back. The handcuffs clicked with a sound I heard from 15 feet away. Final. Irreversible. Alden's confidence shattered like glass hitting concrete. Passengers in forward rows craned necks, whispers rippling through business class. Ramona moved smoothly into the aisle, voice calm and professional. Temporary delay for customs processing. Please remain seated. The cabin settled, but tension spread like smoke. Passengers exchanged glances, checked phones, whispered questions to companions. Ramona maintained her position, coffee pot still in hand, expression revealing nothing. Alden spun toward the cabin, eyes wild, searching. His gaze locked on Lorraine, visible in row 3. Did you set this up? He shouted through the open door, voice cracking with desperation. Lorraine! Every head in business class turned toward row 3. Alden struggled against the officer's grip, leaning toward the doorway. Lorraine, tell them we're together. The cabin went absolutely silent. Lorraine stood slowly, stepped into the aisle, turned to face the jetway door 30 feet forward. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice. 5 words perfectly clear. I didn't sign the paper. Alden's face twisted, shock, betrayal, comprehension cascading across his features in 3 seconds. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. You. The officers guided him backward down the jetway toward the terminal. He shouted something incoherent, struggled briefly against their hold, then went silent. The jetway door closed with a hydraulic hiss. The threat was gone. The cabin exhaled collectively, passengers shifting in seats, whispers resuming, the tension breaking like a fever. Ramona set down the coffee pot and began normal deplaning preparations, her professionalism never wavering. Lorraine remained standing in the aisle. She turned slowly from the jetway, scanning the cabin, as if searching for orientation. Her eyes moved forward past row 2, past row 1, past the galley, and found me standing in the cockpit doorway. 30 feet separated us. Might as well have been 30 miles. Her face went pale, color draining like water from a broken vessel. Eyes wide, recognition dawning with the force of physical impact. She understood whose aircraft she'd boarded yesterday morning, whose evidence had trapped Alden, whose coordination had delivered federal officers to this gate, whose marriage she'd destroyed while sleeping 6 rows behind his command seat. She didn't know, I thought, until now. I watched the comprehension land, watched horror and shame and devastation cross her face in sequence, watched her lips part, no sound emerging. I held her gaze for 3 seconds, then stepped backward into the cockpit and closed the door. The bulkhead was solid against my back, cool metal through my uniform shirt. I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly. Captain, Wade's voice quiet. I opened my eyes. Start post-flight. He nodded once and turned to the checklist. Through the cockpit door's narrow window, I could see Ramona beginning normal deplaning procedures. Passengers stood, collected bags filed toward the exit. The line moved steadily. Lorraine remained frozen in row 3, staring at the empty cockpit doorway where I'd stood 3 seconds earlier. Passengers flowed past her, businessmen checking phones, families gathering children, flight attendants offering assistance, oblivious that the woman in 3A had just watched her future arrested and her past reappear in the same 90 seconds. Wade's hand appeared in my peripheral vision, holding a satellite message printout. I took it, read the text from Celeste. Emergency asset freeze granted 900 Monday Eastern Standard Time. Court order effective immediately upon filing. All joint accounts, property transfers, business registrations, frozen pending fraud investigation. You're protected. Monday morning, 72 hours from now. 72 hours to survive what happened after the aircraft stopped moving. I placed the manila folder on the crew lounge table between us and watched my wife of 32 years stare at evidence she didn't yet know existed. 72 hours stretched ahead. But first this. I'd found Lorraine standing in the deplaning area, passengers flowing past her. I gestured toward the operations corridor. She'd followed 30 feet behind. We walked through this terminal in silence, just footsteps echoing. The crew lounge was small, one table, two chairs, window overlooking taxiways. I closed the door. Lorraine stood near the window, arms wrapped around herself. "We need to talk. Privately," I said. "Harlan, I didn't know." "Not here." I gestured to the chair. "Sit." She sat. I remained standing. I opened the manila folder and began laying items on the table. Passenger manifest showing Mr. and Mrs. Bridges in seats 3A and 3B. ATM withdrawal logs. Text message transcripts Sienna had compiled. Shell company routing codes traced to Alden's prior aliases. I said nothing. Let the evidence speak. Lorraine's face went progressively paler. "I had 12 hours to organize what you organized over 6 months," I said finally. "How did you—" She stopped. "Sienna. It was my aircraft, Lorraine. My flight deck. You booked passage on the one route where I had absolute authority to act." She stared at the manifest. Her name next to an alias I'd never heard her use. "Mrs. Christine Wallace. I didn't know he was a criminal," she said quietly. I thought. She stopped. Started again. "You were gone so much, Harlan. I was alone. The house was empty. Sienna building her career, you flying routes that kept you away for days." He was present. He listened. He made me feel visible. I finished. "I understand." I did. I could trace the erosion backward, through years of overnight layovers, missed anniversaries, conversations postponed. I'd prioritized altitude over intimacy, assumed the marriage would hold course while I navigated other skies. Lorraine looked up, surprised. "Then, let me finish." I sat across from her. "I loved you 30 years, Lorraine. I was in the air too much. I take my share of that failure. I chose roots over presence." She nodded, tears forming. "But," I continued, voice steady, "between a husband who traveled too much and coordinated financial conspiracy, there's a valley I can't cross." The tears spilled over. "You didn't sign the transfer document," I said. "That matters. I need you to know I see that, even if it doesn't alter where we land." Silence filled the room. Outside, an A380 pushed back, wings flexing in the heat. Lorraine's voice came small. "Can you forgive me?" I looked at her for a long time. Considered the question with the same precision I'd use for critical system failure. Weighed variables, assessed outcomes. "I don't know," I said finally, "but I cannot continue the flight." She closed her eyes. I stood, moved toward the door, paused. "My attorney will contact yours. Not today. When you land in New York." "Harlan, goodbye, Lorraine." I walked out, leaving her with the evidence spread before her. The crew shuttle took 40 minutes to the hotel. I checked in, rode to the 6th floor. The uniform came off, piece by piece. Jacket, tie, shirt with epaulettes. I showered until the water ran cold. Dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, plain shirt, no insignia. Sat on the bed edge and stared at my phone. The weight of the uniform was gone. Everything else remained. The phone rang at 9:30 a.m. Dubai time, 12:30 a.m. New York. "Sienna," I answered. "Hey, sweetheart." One word came back, "Dad." "You okay?" "I'm okay. Are you?" "I'm finished with the route. I tracked your tail number," she said. "Watched you land. Saw the hold short instruction on the ATC feeds. You did good work. The coordination, the evidence compilation. Professional grade. Learned from the best." Silence. Not uncomfortable. Just present. "Dad, I still love Mom." "I know you do. Does that?" "It doesn't change anything between you and me," I said. "She's your mother. That doesn't end because the marriage does." Her exhale. Relief maybe. Permission. "There's one more thing," I said. "Read me the last text. The one you flagged in the air." "You sure?" "I'm sure." Paper rustling. Then Sienna's voice. "What if I'm wrong about him moving this fast? Feels I don't know." Scared. I closed my eyes. "When did she send that?" "Thursday afternoon, 6 hours before departure." "She knew," I said quietly. Not what he was, but that something wasn't right. "That's why I waited," Sienna said. "You needed to hear her first, before you heard that." My daughter. 23 years old. Wiser than I'd been at 40. "Thank you. Love you, Dad." "Love you too, sweetheart. Get some sleep." The call ended. I sat still, phone in hand. Outside Dubai hummed traffic on Sheikh Zayed Road, construction equipment. The evening call to prayer, drifting faint across glass towers. Air conditioning cycled on white noise, filling space. 10 minutes passed. I was alone. Completely alone for the first time in 32 years. I wasn't lonely. The city sounds weren't empty. They were real, present, actual, real, not lonely. I walked to this window, looked out at a city I'd flown over 100 times but never really seen. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Lorraine was boarding her return flight as a passenger, not a wife. Somewhere in Manhattan, Sienna was probably still awake, monitoring legal filings. My laptop chimed. Email from Celeste. Asset freeze executed Monday, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Separation agreement drafted. Sienna's trust restored to standalone status. Your name sole trustee until her 30th birthday. Documents attached. Call when ready. 32 years, 12 hours, 5 documents. I closed the laptop. 72 hours remained before my return flight. 72 hours in a city where nobody knew my name. Nobody needed my navigation. Nobody was waiting for me to come home. The first trip in 3 decades where I wasn't flying back to her. Sienna called Sunday evening to tell me what happened when Lorraine walked into the apartment that no longer remembered her as home. I'd spent 72 hours in Dubai, where nobody knew my name. Now I was back in New York, back in a JFK crew hotel room, identical to 1,000 others, listening to my daughter describe the careful dismantling of 32 years. Dad, I need to tell you about this afternoon, Sienna said. How bad? Not bad, just final. I sat on the bed edge, phone pressed to my ear, and let her talk. She'd been there as witness, legal requirement per Celeste's instructions. 1 supervised entry for Lorraine to collect personal effects. Sunday at 2 p.m. the penthouse quiet, except for traffic noise filtering up from Lexington Avenue. The doorman had greeted Lorraine first. Simon. 30 years of morning hellos, package deliveries, taxi summons in the rain. He'd watched Sienna grow from infant to law school graduate. He'd accepted Christmas tips and remembered birthdays. Mrs. Bridges, he'd said, formal as a court clerk. Your daughter is waiting upstairs. Not Lorraine. Mrs. Bridges. Thank you, Simon, Lorraine had replied, voice small. He'd escorted her to the elevator without small talk. No inquiry about her trip. No comment on the weather. 30 years of warmth erased like condensation from glass. He didn't smile, Dad, Sienna said. 30 years and he didn't smile. I understood. The building staff knew. Word traveled through service corridors faster than through social circles. Lorraine had become the woman who'd done something, specifics unclear, judgment absolute. The key card still worked. Sienna had arranged that one final supervised entry before locks changed Monday morning. Lorraine had stepped inside and stopped. The apartment looked correct but wrong, Sienna said. Like a stage set, missing props, furniture in proper positions, views through windows unchanged. But the space had transformed from home to inventory. It looks smaller, Lorraine had said. Just emptier, Sienna replied. Lorraine had moved slowly through the living room, seeing absences. When did he take the piano? Tuesday, while you were still in Dubai. The Steinway that had occupied the corner for 28 years, gone. The bookshelf I'd built in 1998, gone. Family photographs that had lined the hallway removed, leaving pale rectangles on wallpaper that had faded around them. My instruments transported to storage. Disputed financial files sealed under evidence tape, corporate lawyer's signature across the seal. The wedding portrait that had hung above the mantel for 3 decades, absent only the nail hole visible. The wedding photo, Lorraine had started. He took anything that was his, Sienna said. Left everything that was yours. Lorraine had touched the nail hole, including the silence. Sienna described watching her mother catalog the erasure. Methodical removal. No rage, no vandalism. Just surgical extraction of one life from the shared space, leaving the other life outlined in negative space. Lorraine had walked to the bedroom. Sienna stayed in the doorway, didn't follow. Some grief required privacy, even from daughters. The closet on my side, empty. Hangers bare, evenly spaced like ribs. My side of the bathroom counter cleared, products gone, surface wiped clean. The book on my nightstand removed. Reading glasses gone. Phone charger absent. Presence erased so completely that absence became its own statement. Sienna said she counted to 30 before her mother emerged. Lorraine's face was dry, but changed like something had settled internally. She'd returned to the living area and stopped, centered on the dining table, plain white envelope. Her name written in my handwriting, the same distinct cursive from 30 years of anniversary cards. Sienna said Lorraine had stared at it for a full minute before approaching. She just stood there, Dad, looking at your handwriting. Did you read it? Lorraine had asked. It's not addressed to me. Lorraine had opened the envelope slowly, unfolded a single page. Sienna couldn't see the words, but watched her mother's face while reading. The letter was brief, maybe 200 words. Sienna said Lorraine's eyes moved slowly across the lines, reading, absorbing, reading again. I'd written it in Dubai. 3 drafts before finding words that carried weight without cruelty. Acknowledged the 32 years shared. Referenced that she didn't sign the final document stated that mattered to me. Made clear I could not offer reconciliation, but would not pursue criminal charges against her personally. Alden bore that burden alone. Ended with one line I'd revised 17 times. I love the woman I married. I grieve her differently than you do. Sienna said Lorraine read it twice. Slow the first time, slower the second. Mom, what does it say? Sienna had asked. Lorraine read the final line aloud. I loved the woman I married. I grieve her differently than you do. Sienna had moved toward her instinctively. Stopped when Lorraine raised one hand. Don't, please. Okay. Sienna stayed 5 feet distant, respecting the boundary her mother needed. Lorraine had looked at the letter one more time, then lowered herself slowly onto the hardwood floor beside the dining table, still holding the page. Not collapse. Deliberate descent. She sat cross-legged like a child letter in her lap. No scream. No visible tears. Just sat. Sienna counted 90 seconds before speaking. She just sat down, Sienna told me, like her legs stopped working. Mom, Sienna had said. I understand now, Lorraine replied. Sienna finished her account. The line went quiet. Do you want to know anything else? She asked. I looked at the crew hotel window at my reflection against darkness beyond. Long pause while I considered what questions mattered. Is she safe? Yes, Dad, she's safe. Thank you for being there. Where else would I be? I heard the fatigue in my daughter's voice. The weight of standing between 2 parents who'd both asked her to choose, and both insisted she shouldn't have to. Get some sleep, sweetheart. You too. The call ended. I set the phone down and walked to the window overlooking runway 4L, where I'd landed the same aircraft 72 hours and 32 years ago, depending how you measure distance. Sienna had mentioned one more thing before hanging up, something Lorraine asked after reading the letter. Does he know I loved him? Sienna had told her yes. I hadn't known that was the question until my daughter answered it. Tomorrow I'd meet Celeste to finalize paperwork that would make arithmetic out of grief. Asset division. Custody arrangements that no longer mattered with an adult daughter. Separation agreement that documented the end in legal terminology designed to minimize ambiguity. But tonight, I stood at glass wondering if the woman sitting on that hardwood floor 3 miles south was mourning the same marriage I was, or a different one entirely. The fountain pen I'd used for 30 years of anniversary cards felt identical, writing a check for $132,000 to end the marriage those cards commemorated. The paperwork with Celeste had taken 3 hours Monday morning. Asset division. Custody arrangements that no longer mattered. Separation agreement documented in legal terminology designed to minimize ambiguity. Now 3 weeks later, I sat at my new apartment desk, finishing what the lawyers couldn't. The checkbook lay open. Amount $132,000 exact. The summer withdrawals plus the JFK theft. Drawn from my personal reserve, old captain's discipline money saved across decades for emergencies I'd never properly defined. I'd defined it now. I wrote a small note on plain paper, attached it to the check with a paper clip. I prepared this as our anniversary gift. Use it well. 9 words, same pen, different meaning. I'd built that fund over 15 years. Small deposits from per diem accounts, bonuses, upgrade pay differentials. The balance had crossed 6 figures in 2022. I'd envisioned reaching $150,000 by our 30th anniversary in September 2024, then surprising Lorraine with something extraordinary. Paris, maybe. A second honeymoon. Mozart at Sainte-Chapelle, the way she'd described wanting to hear it since we were young. Premium seats, champagne at intermission week in a hotel where nobody knew us. I'd never imagined it would serve as final financial clearance. The pen didn't know the difference in purpose. I did. I signed the check with the same flourish I'd used on 3 decades of anniversary cards. Muscle memory executing what intention had abandoned. The signature looked identical to every prior year. The context had transformed completely. But as I set the pen down, something unexpected settled in my chest. The anniversary gift was still fulfilling its purpose, providing for Lorraine, caring for her future, ensuring she had resources to rebuild, just not the trajectory I'd envisioned when saving it. Still an anniversary gift. Still expressing care. Different landing than the filed flight plan, but the fundamental intent remained. Protect the person you'd promised to protect, even when the promise changed shape. I placed the check and note in an envelope. Sealed it. Wrote Lorraine's temporary address on the front, in the same careful script I'd used for 30 years of mailed cards when layovers kept me away from home. Set it on the desk for tomorrow's courier pickup. Physical finality. One more item crossed off the separation checklist. The phone rang. Celeste's name on the screen. I answered. Celeste. Harlan. Legal updates if you have 10 minutes. Go ahead. Her voice carried the precise satisfaction of an attorney watching machinery execute correctly. Alden Frost was denied bail by the Dubai magistrate. Extreme flight risk, multiple identity documentation pattern of interstate evasion. He'll remain in custody pending extradition. Timeline, 60 to 90 days. Mutual legal assistance protocols require formal hearing, but outcome isn't in doubt. I looked out my apartment window at a view I was still learning. Different neighborhood. Different light. What else? FBI expanded the case to racketeering. 7 interstate complaints spanning 2017 through this year. Your passenger Clarence Harding signed as lead plaintiff in the class action. 7 confirmed victims, I said. 7 complaints filed so far. Ramona is coordinating with other flight attendants who recognized Alden from prior routes. Likely more surfacing. Federal machinery is thorough when properly activated, I said. Your 12-hour documentation made it possible, Celeste replied. The shell entities all frozen by SEC order. Delaware Corporation's Nevada Holdings Caribbean registrations. Every layer peeled back. And the JFK withdrawal, recovered. Deposited back to your account as of Tuesday. The money never reached Alden's access wire transfer, flagged and reversed within the 72-hour window. I closed my eyes briefly. The theft that had felt so absolute on the jetway undone by procedure and timing. Nothing left but documentation of fraud, Celeste continued. Alden's entire financial architecture collapsed. Good. Her tone shifted slightly. Delicate. One more item, regarding Lorraine. I waited. She signed a non-prosecution agreement with federal prosecutors. Full testimony regarding Alden's methods, shell company structures, recruitment tactics. In exchange, no charges filed on the unauthorized transfer contingent on full compliance and continued cooperation. She testified against him, I said, extensively. The agreement protects her from criminal record if compliance is maintained. No charges filed, no conviction recorded. I looked at the sealed envelope on my desk. The check that would clear her remaining debt to the marriage we'd dissolved. She cooperated fully, Celeste said, for what it's worth. It's worth something, I replied. Silence on the line. Then Celeste continued. Final detail. Lorraine's corporate counsel, the attorney who advised her on shifting retirement capital to the shell entities, is now under state bar review. Ethical violations for facilitating asset transfer without proper due diligence on business legitimacy. I sat forward. Her lawyer, under investigation. Not criminal charges, but professional consequences. Every person who touched this scheme, Alden Shell Company officers, legal advisors enabling the structure facing accountability. Everyone who touched it, I repeated. The circle is complete, Celeste said. Machinery works when the pilot handles controls correctly. Sienna would be proud. She already is, I said. You coordinated this flawlessly, Celeste. Sienna initiated it. Ramona documented it. You flew it. Her voice carried quiet respect. Team effort, Captain. Thank you, Celeste. Call if you need anything else. The line disconnected. I set the phone down, looked at the sealed envelope on the desk. Beside it sat my flight logbook, the physical record I still maintained despite electronic tracking, making it technically obsolete. I'd recorded the route. JFK to Dubai to JFK Route 214 aircraft tail N447 SR block time 23.4 hours, passengers 287. In the remarks column 1 line, passenger incident resolved groundside Dubai. 32 years reduced to logbook shorthand, but the chapter had reached its final page. Not the ending I'd written when starting the route. Not the landing I'd filed in the original flight plan, but executed within parameters. All souls delivered safely. Some marriages don't survive turbulence, The phone buzzed. Text from Sienna. Dinner Friday, just us. Brooklyn place you've never been. Mom didn't like noise. Time to try new restaurants, Dad. I read it twice, smiled despite everything. Typed back, send me the address. I picked up the envelope containing the check, held it for a moment. Final financial obligation. Final gesture of care for someone who'd shared 3 decades of my life. Tomorrow the courier would deliver it. The legal separation would be financially complete. The arithmetic of grief executed with precision. But some flights don't end when wheels touch pavement. They end when you finally taxi to a gate you've never used before. 3 months after Dubai, I woke to December frost covering Connecticut hills and realized I'd slept through the night without checking my phone once the first unbroken sleep in a decade of marriage. The Brooklyn restaurant with Sienna had become weekly ritual. New gates, new restaurants, new conversations that didn't require navigating around invisible damage. Now I packed my flight kit for Singapore, 12-day assignment, familiar routine. The apartment was quiet, organized, mine alone. Weather checked, flight plan reviewed, coffee made in a kitchen where every item occupied space I'd chosen for it. 12 days, Singapore, Mumbai, back through Frankfurt. Clean route. I found the photograph while organizing the mantle. Young Lorraine, at a concert hall. 1992. Dark eyes, genuine smile, hands, mid-gesture, explaining something about Mozart she'd loved enough to teach strangers. The woman I'd proposed to on a bridge at sunrise. I looked at it for 1 long minute, then placed it openly on the mantle. Not hidden, not burned, visible as factual history. She existed. That woman was real. Denying her didn't serve anyone. The photograph would stay there, not shrine, not accusation. Just acknowledgement that 32 years happened, some of them good, and pretending otherwise was navigation by false instruments. I locked the front door, loaded my flight bag into the car. Frost melting on the windshield as sunrise broke through bare trees. The drive to JFK followed roads I'd traveled 10,000 times, but the interior landscape had shifted. Same roads, different destination. I was going towards something now, not away from something else. The car radio played low news weather traffic. I half listened while frost patterns evaporated from glass. Then a headline cut through. Alden Frost entered not guilty plea to federal wire fraud charges yesterday. Trial scheduled spring 2025. Prosecutors say evidence includes testimony from multiple victims across 7 states. I listened for 15 seconds, then turned the dial off. Not my navigation problem. Not anymore. The federal machinery would execute its function. I'd delivered my portion of the flight testimony, documented evidence, preserved coordination complete. What happened in courtrooms was someone else's altitude to maintain. JFK Crew Operations Lounge smelled like bad coffee and jet fuel, same as always. Wade Farrell sat near the window reviewing charts, uniform crisp, reading glasses perched on his nose. He saw me, stood immediately, genuine warmth. Captain Bridges, good to see you. Wade, you pulling Singapore rotation too? Wouldn't miss it. Clean route. He gestured to the empty chair. Coffee's terrible as usual. Some things never change. We sat. 2 men who'd navigated severe system failure together. The kind of shared experience that created permanent frequency between pilots didn't require constant transmission. Just mutual understanding that the channel stayed open. Wade reviewed his approach charts. I checked fuel calculations on my tablet. Comfortable silence. Then Wade set his coffee down, looked at me carefully. How are you holding up, sir, honestly? I considered the question. Not the polite deflection. The actual answer. Sleeping better than I have in a decade, Wade. He nodded slowly. Good. That's good. No follow-up questions. No probing. Just acknowledgement that peace mattered, and witnessing it was enough. I looked through the lounge window at the tarmac. Aircraft being serviced, baggage carts moving with choreographed precision, ground crews executing procedures refined across decades. Singapore is clean route, Wade said. Straightforward. All routes are good routes, Wade, as long as you fly them straight. He smiled slightly. Copy that, Captain. Operations called flight crew for boarding. We collected our bags, walked to the gate with the unhurried rhythm of professionals who'd done this enough times to trust the process. No drama. Just another departure. 45 minutes later, the aircraft broke through the final gray cloud layer. Upper sky opened, blue, cold, absolute. Wade handled radio communications with departure control. I monitored systems, verified climb profile, adjusted trim as weight burned off with fuel consumption. People ask why I still fly at 62. Why not retire travel as passenger, let younger pilots handle the precision? Because up here the horizon is always honest. It doesn't pretend to be closer than it is. Doesn't shift when you're not looking. Shows you exactly how far you can see and doesn't apologize for the distance remaining. 30 years of marriage taught me some horizons are false painted backdrops that look solid until you try to reach them and your hand passes through empty air. 30 years of flying taught me turbulence passes. Severe weather exists, will always exist. But aircraft are built to handle stress if you don't fight the controls. The most important thing isn't avoiding bad weather. It's keeping hands steady when you're in it, following procedure, and bringing the aircraft home. I did that. Walked away from bad weather, the only way that matters, intact, clear-headed, already thinking about the next departure. The seat beside me in that cockpit, the one Wade occupied, now the one Lorraine never understood, the one that had always been my real marriage, was never a right. Always a privilege. Something earned through hours and training and decisions made correctly, when incorrectly would have been easier. Now the other seat, the one at my dinner table, the one in my apartment, the one in my life, was exactly where it belonged, mine to offer, when I chose to someone who understood that altitude requires different instruments than ground navigation. Maybe Sienna someday when she needed advice. Maybe someone new eventually when the route called for it. But not because I was lonely. Because I was ready. The sky stretched infinite ahead. Clean, blue, honest. I turned to Wade in the right seat. 30 years of flight experience. 3 months of rebuilding. 1 moment of absolute clarity. Beautiful morning, I said. Let's take her up. Wade adjusted the climb rate. I confirmed the heading. The aircraft responded exactly as designed. We climbed into blue. And to you listening to my story, remember this: the altitude you choose when facing betrayal determines how you land. I made mistakes in my marriage. I prioritized flight schedules over presence, assumed love would hold course without maintenance. Don't make my mistake of thinking your partner can navigate loneliness alone. But when betrayal comes, and sometimes it does, you have a choice. Let it crash you or maintain your heading and bring everyone home safely. I believe God put me through this test at 39,000 feet for a reason. The lesson wasn't about revenge, it was about keeping hands steady when the instruments show system failure. It was about choosing dignity over destruction, professional duty over personal rage. In grandpa stories like this one, we often hear about dramatic confrontations. But real strength sometimes looks like saying, "We fly first," when your world is ending 6 rows behind you. That's the wisdom these grandpa stories carry. How we handle our worst moments defines who we become. If this story resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below, what would you have done in my position? And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Dad's Revenge Stories for more stories about choosing dignity when life tests you hardest. Thank you for staying until the very end. Just a reminder, certain details in this story have been adjusted for storytelling purposes. What matters most is the message, and I hope it stays with you long after you stop listening.